All right. Good evening, everyone. I'm going to call to order the budget hearing for Thursday, September 6, 2018. Let's start with a roll call.
Mr. Gentry.
Here.
Mr. Guerin.
Here.
Mr. Troy.
Here.
Mr. Quagliano.
Here.
Mrs. Melendi.
Here.
Mrs. Walker.
Here.
Mr. Fleck.
I am here, and we do have a quorum, so let's go on to the Pledge of Allegiance. Mrs. Majewski will now call up her group.
We are on. Good evening. I have a group of fantastic fifth graders from Conley Elementary. They are here to lead us in the pledge tonight, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves.
I'm Mia Rose. I'm Emma.
I'm Brennan. Jack.
Jessica.
Okay, let's all stand.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
You're going to go this way. Head on and go ahead and grab one of those chairs.
Sit anywhere, just make sure the green light's on and you can talk normally into the microphone.
Cool.
These are really comfy chairs.
Or selfies.
Brennan, how's the mouth?
Much.
Okay. You guys are looking pretty comfortable up there. Well, thanks for leading us in the pledge. I just got a couple of questions for you guys, and if you have any questions for us, you can go ahead and ask them. First question, how's school going so far?
Good.
Good. You guys are in the top class of your school now, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, how's that feel?
Good.
Yeah. How'd you guys get picked to lead us in the pledge tonight?
I don't know.
You don't know? You're just walking by and somebody grabbed you and told you to come over here? Well, clearly you showed good leadership skills, and we appreciate your doing that for us. Do you have any idea who we are and what we do?
Important stuff.
We do important stuff? Okay, thank you. Okay, well, the school board, what we do is we do a lot of things that help you guys have a good education. We help set policy, we pass budgets, we vote on things that the school brings to us so that the real professionals, the administrators and the teachers and the principals can all do what's best for you guys for your school year, okay? A couple more questions for you, and I'm just going to go down the list. What is your favorite subject so far? Math?
Math.
Math. Math.
Okay, so apparently it was the math class that got picked to lead us in the pledge, so, okay. And how's the lunchroom food so far?
Good.
Good.
Good, okay. That's kind of a risky question, but all right. Well, thanks a lot. We're going to go up and stand behind you and take some pictures with you, and then we'll get started with the rest of the meeting, unless you want to lead it for us. Okay, we'll take the pictures instead. Thanks.
Is it awesome? Great job. Thanks for being here. You can have my seat. Keep it warm. Why don't you stay cool? Fist bumps.
Well, that never happened.
Leslie.
Oh, geez. How tall is Sean? So you're not that much taller. Okay, yeah, taller.
Yeah.
All right.
Hey, why don't you guys at the end come on down? We'll be part of our group.
We do.
Not you though, because you're too tall. Here, come over here by me, because I, you know.
Just because.
As tall as she is.
Look, I'm taller than someone.
Want to stand in here too? Oh, yeah.
Come on, just like
Okay, sit up straight, guys. All right.
See her, Dan?
All right. Take a couple. Mr. Armstrong is a professional.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, this kid-
You're gonna run out of
this
battery.
guy's
buddy.
got 1,000 pictures.
You're taking video.
Yeah.
Are we still standing?
Okay. Okay. Hey, thanks a lot, guys. You guys did great.
Thanks, guys. Good job.
Have a good year, okay?
Good job. Thank you, guys.
Still got my phone.
Oh, my phone. Thank you.
Okay. Next item is the budget hearing. I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Altmeyer.
Thank you very, very much. I am pleased to present the FY19 budget. This is always a long 8 to 9 month process, so it's good that we are now moving forward and approving the FY19 budget a few months into the year, as we always do after receiving a little more information out of the state of Illinois. This budget continues to drive the strategic plan of the district. It allocates resources, it outlines the financial blueprint, and provides opportunities to our students as well as the families of 158. So what I'm going to do is, at a very high level, I will walk through the budget. I'll get into a little detail on the revenue and expenditure side. I'll talk about some of the key assumptions that I think the board needs to be aware of, and I will end it with modifications from the last draft that was presented. So at a very high level, operating revenues are budgeted at 105.14 million, with operating expenditures budgeted at 104.86 million, resulting in an operating surplus of $273,237. Looking at a little more detail on the revenue side, the FY19 operating revenues are budgeted to increase approximately 1.8 million over the FY18 amended budget, if you were looking at the two, and that is driven primarily by an increase in levy dollars of 2.2 million, driven by CPI of 2.1%, and an increase in state revenues by approximately 1.5 million. But it's also offset by the prior year recognition of the FY17 state categorical payment of 1.6 million, which is why we amended the budget in FY18. So I just wanted to note that. Looking a little closer at the state revenues, excluding prior year's categorical payment received, state revenues are budgeted to increase 1.5 million as a result of an estimated increase associated with the evidence-based funding model of $775,000. So that is holding us harmless with what we received in prior year, plus another $775,000 associated with the $300 million set aside by the folks in Springfield, because we are a Tier 2 district at 67% of adequacy. That, combined with an increase in the transportation reimbursement claim of $750,000, which we talked about at the last meeting, which is a result of increased depreciation of a few $100,000 as a result of the district purchasing approximately 14 buses in prior year at about $1 million, as well as health insurance benefit claims, as we saw a significant uptick in health insurance claims in the transportation area fund. All other revenue line items are fairly flat with the FY18 budget amounts. On the expense side of the house, operating expenditures are budgeted to increase approximately $2 million over the FY18 amended budget, primarily driven by an increase in salaries and benefits, offset by a reduction in supplies and primarily capital outlay. Let's look a little deeper at on the expense side. Salaries and benefits within the FY19 budgeted increased $3.4 million over the FY18 amended budget, primarily as a result of new hires of $600,000 for additional needs, union increases of $2.3 million, and benefits of $500,000 increase over the FY18 budget. $200,000 of that $500,000 are for TRS, and FICA increase is being payroll taxes. Capital outlay is budgeted to decrease approximately $1.2 million from the FY18 budget due to a decrease in the O&M department's capital accounts, and that's the building projects as well as improvements, not buildings, of $1 million, as well as a very small decrease in bus purchases of $173,000. Please note that bus purchases for FY19 are budgeted at $1 million, so we will continue in the out years to set approximately $1 million to $1.3 million aside so that we can continue to replace our fleet moving forward. Other expense line items, just to make the board aware, other objects under operating is currently budgeted to remain flat with FY18 at approximately $2.5 million. Those expenses cover private facility room and board as well as out-of-district tuition. As a result, again, the FY19 proposed budget reflects a balanced budget with a current operating surplus of $273,000. Key assumptions that the board should be aware of: the 2017 and 18 levy is pretty much locked and loaded with CPI at 2.1%. New construction is estimated at $18 million within the levy year 2018. Today I did receive the McHenry preliminary estimates on EAV. I'm still waiting to receive something from Kane County. And McHenry County is reflecting new construction of about $4.6 million from a preliminary standpoint, which is pretty flat with what it was in prior year. Kane is where we'll see the majority of new construction with a lot of what's happening on Route 47. So once we get that information, I will share both of those with the board. The state funding, we talked about that, does reflect the new evidence-based model. Impact fees have been reduced to reflect the current decreased trend of residential housing in the district, as well as the lack of residential development that we do have. The hope is that by year end for FY19 that we do have some new developers in place and we can see some impact fees coming in. Interest income has been increased to approximately $550,000 to reflect the more favorable investment rates that we're seeing, so that's good news. On the expenditure side, we talked about salaries reflecting the district's collective bargaining agreements. Health insurance is budgeted to increase 3.5% based upon the current fiscal year 18 trended claim experience, increasing to approximately $9.1 million. Lastly, the reserve for replacement, which for FY18 was budgeted at $500,000, is also budgeted at $500,000 for FY19. So we continue to set dollars aside for future capital projects in the out years. So that's good news. Capital expenditures, technology equipment, as well as curriculum materials and adoptions. Those are all very material expense items. They reflect last year's 5-year plan amounts, essentially reflecting the amount of the current needs of those departments. So we are budgeting the all-in needs of those departments. So we are in very good shape. This is a very, very strong budget. Modifications to the FY19 budget draft 2. I'll only note some material adjustments, the largest one being the transportation claim. In the month of July and August, we finalized that transportation claim, and we increased the FY19 budget by $779,000, and the majority of that was allocated to building capital projects. Those are the material adjustments since the draft 2 of the FY19 budget. With that, administration is seeking approval of the FY19 proposed budget at the special board meeting following this meeting. I'd be happy to answer any questions the board may have.
Okay. Any questions?
I do.
Go ahead.
So I just want to touch, and I know, Mark, you and I talked about this earlier, but for the 35% ending fund balance, that's what we have in our reserves. Can you talk about, that seems high to me, and so I asked you about that, and you, were giving me some statistics about what other school districts, where they are with their reserves. Can you kind of share that with us so we have an idea of where we stand with some other schools in respect to our reserves?
Absolutely, that's a great question. So on the dashboard page of your budget, and certainly you all have a hard copy of the budget in front of you, and I think that's maybe 10 or 11 pages in, but I think we're all familiar with the snapshot summary. That snapshot summary outlines our beginning and ending fund balances over the years from FY16 through FY19. And after FY19, we anticipate an ending fund balance of approximately $36.4 million. That may change a little bit based on FY18 actual results, because this document that you have in front of you actually reflects the FY18 amended budget amounts. But that being said, our fund balance is approximately 35% of our operating revenues. We have a fund balance policy of 25%. We want to maintain at least a 25% operating fund balance. So we're in pretty good financial shape. The conversation I had with Ms. Melendi earlier today was, well, where does that stand? That sounds very high to me. And it's not really high. In fact, in McHenry County, of all the districts in McHenry County, looking at the percentage of fund balance as a percentage of operating revenues for all of the districts, we are actually the second lowest as a percentage of operating fund balance as a percentage of operating revenues. The only other district that has a smaller percentage to us is Johnsburg, and they're at approximately 3%. So they're not really doing too well. But most other districts, from 155 to 47 to all the other districts in McHenry County, have a much higher fund balance percentage than we do. So yet I still feel that we are financially we're sound. We're in good financial position. I would always like to have another 5% in fund balance, but I think we have what we need. I don't think we will run short of cash, and that's always the fear of why you need a 25% fund balance. You want to make sure you make payroll in the months of March and April. So I hope that provides you a little more information as to where we are versus all the other McHenry districts.
It does. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks.
My only other comment is on the state aid or evidence-based model. This is a comment because I know, Mark, you have nothing to do with it, but it does make me a little nervous because history tells us that the state of Illinois is not the most reliable in paying what they say they're going to pay. So that one makes me a little nervous. But I do want to thank you, though, because this is, I feel like we're being very fiscally responsible in our district. So thank you. Thank you for your hard work on this budget.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions or comments?
Just a quick follow-up on that notion of the March-April balance. Like, how low do we get at that point of year, just in general, relative to the year-end balance?
Sorry, didn't have my microphone on. We don't. Right now, our low cash balance is in the mid 20 million range still. Back in 2009 and 10, 2009, we were down to about $1 million or $2 million. But since that time, we have increased our fund balance significantly.
Right. I think that's an important
to
data
put us in
point
the position we're in today, that we don't have to worry about making payroll during those months and
But
borrowing.
20 is a lot different number than 35.
Correct.
Just for a context, I think.
Yes.
It's important to note.
Yeah, another way people look at this is how many days can you keep the doors open with that fund balance? And this is best practices where we're right where we need to be, would you say?
Correct.
Okay. Now, the other...
I would agree with that.
The question I have regarding health insurance budgeting is, do you know how that tracks with respect to the region? And I don't mean just schools, I mean the region's expected growth in healthcare costs. Are we...
Unfortunately, I do not. We have our annual health insurance committee meeting actually a week from now, where generally we receive that type of information as to what to expect the coming year. But what I'm seeing based on our claim experience, because everybody's claim experience is a little different based on the population, based on the age of your plan, and the type of claims that you currently have in your plan, which is how I estimated at 3.5%, should be, I don't want to say more than enough to keep us favorable to budget. As the board knows that we've been somewhat favorable, we've been very favorable to budget on health insurance claims for the last several years, including FY18. But you never know, that one year that might come down the pipeline that we have a very significant number of large claims that will drive us beyond budget, which we had, I believe, in 2009 or 10.
Okay,
So,
very good. Any other questions or comments from the board?
I did have a question. There was an inconsistency that I wanted to get cleared up. During the executive summary, I don't have a page number, but it's the chart that shows FY17, FY18 amended. It's the multicolored column chart. It has the different draft iterations. Yeah. I'm looking at the proposed budget on there, and then I'm comparing it to that snapshot summary a few pages later. And I notice on the snapshot, it's saying that there's a 35% fund balance. I'm sorry, the reserve is at 35, and the other one's at 29.
well, that is a great question.
Okay.
So less the reserve, the restricted amount that we set aside, that the board passes a resolution each year, you know, to get to where we are on that reserve for replacement. That's what the 29 represents.
Okay.
The 29% represents the fund balance percentage net of the reserve.
Thank you.
Okay.
And I should have included the 35% up above so you can see both. I apologize for that.
No, no problem. That's why I asked the question, just for clarification.
Very good. Anything else? Okay, there being no other questions or comments, do we have any public comments related to the budget hearing, Mr. Armstrong? Okay, then with that, I will make a motion to adjourn the budget hearing at 6:24. Is there a second? Second by Ms. Melendi. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, we are adjourned from the budget hearing. Next item, next meeting, I guess. Is the special meeting. So we will start with, yes, at 6:25. Look at that. It's actually what we put in the notice. Okay, let's start with a call to order and roll call, please.
Mrs. Walker. Mrs. Melendi.
Here.
Mr. Guerin. Here. Mr. Fleck.
Here.
Mr. Quagliano. Here. Mr. Gentry.
Here.
Mr. Troy.
Still here?
Okay, so we're all still here. And now do we have any public comment for this special meeting? Okay. With that, then we will have the meeting with the proposed budget. Okay. The budget has been on display for 30 days since August 5th, and we just held the budget hearing, for those of you that forgot the last 2 or 3 minutes. So with that, we're going to be seeking approval of the fiscal year 19 budget as presented at the budget hearing earlier this evening, and I will make a motion to approve the budget as presented.
Second.
The second from Mr. Quagliano. Any discussion? Okay, let's have a roll call.
Mr. Gentry.
Yes.
Mr. Guerin.
Yes.
Mr. Troy.
Yes.
Mr. Quagliano.
Yes.
Mrs. Melendi.
Yes.
Mrs. Walker. Mr. Fleck.
Yes. Okay, that carries unanimously. And with that, we will. I will make a motion to adjourn the special meeting at 6:26 p.m. Is there a second?
Second.
Second from Mr. Guerin. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, we're adjourned. 2 meetings down, 1 to go. All right. So now, oh, I'm sorry, we can't start this yet. It's at 6:30. So let's call to order the Committee of the Whole for September 6th at 6:27 p.m. Can we have a roll call?
Mr. Troy,
Here.
Mrs. Melendi, Mr. Gentry,
Here.
Mr. Quagliano, Mrs. Walker, Mr. Guerin, Mr. Fleck.
Here. Okay, we're all still here. And Mr. Armstrong, is there any public comment for this meeting? Okay, we do have one. Leslie Threadgill-Smith, please. Come on up. Just make sure the green light is on, and per our policy, we have 3 minutes for public comment.
Oh, it was green. Okay, it was green, but not lit green. My name is Leslie Threadgill-Smith. I've been a resident of the district for 20 years. I've been substitute teaching for the district this is my 3rd year. I have wonderful things to say about the substitute teaching. The buildings are always very welcoming. Administration is wonderful with welcoming the guest teachers or substitute teachers. Students are very respectful, very responsible. And the secretary staff at every building is very welcoming, very accommodating. So I have no complaints about that at all. This is not a complaint comment. This is actually a suggestion comment. I've run across many wonderful subs as well in the different lunchrooms and break rooms and things over the couple years. Also, I ran into a lot of subs in the volunteering I've done over the years. My kids are in 7th and 8th grade. And my suggestion is that for substitute teaching every year, whether you've been substitute teaching for 1 year or 20 years, that you start over every year at the base pay, and after 40 days or 40 jobs, then you move to the next increment of pay. Last year they had some challenges filling Friday roles, so they offered the higher rate for Fridays, which, for me, I don't look at what day I'm subbing. I look at my availability versus my kids' availability versus, the subject matter I'd like to be covering. So for me, that was great, but that's not what I looked towards. And I know, I attend the beginning of the school year meeting every year that they put on for the substitute teachers to become more informed if there's any changes or things like that going on with the district. And the longer you're subbing in the district, the more knowledgeable you are about the different buildings, the different campuses, the different procedures. Last year alone, I was present for soft lockdowns, hard lockdowns, walkouts, fire drills, and code reds. And that was 1 year. So it was a very eventful 2nd year of substitute teaching, but I felt very prepared based on, the information that I was given at the substitute meetings and things that I have, been explained to from the administration. My suggestion is that the board would consider not having substitute teachers start over every year, regardless of how many years they've been subbing. Again, it's just a suggestion. I know that the district has a really great retention rate for subs. My kids talk all the time about, well, we had so-and-so again, and they've had them since they were in 2nd grade. So that's a really positive thing for the district. It's also a very positive thing. I know years back, the district went to only, when there was an inundation of a lot of substitute teaching applicants, the district said, okay, we're going to make sure that the people that are in our kids' classrooms, our students' classrooms, are certified teachers, not just having a certified substitute certificate, but they are certified teachers. I myself have 2 degrees in education and 12 years under the belt of teaching prior to being a stay-at-home mom for my kids and now a substitute teacher. So I always felt that was a great move on the district's part. I think the district has made a lot of great moves, towards substitute teachers and making sure that the most qualified and well-rounded people are in those classrooms for the kids. And I just think that if there's a consideration of maybe after the 3rd year of subbing or 4th year of subbing, if you've put in those 40 days, to reward or give incentive to those teachers to keep coming, those substitutes to keep coming back and not have them start over at that 40-day, after the 40-day rate. That was just my suggestion because I plan on substitute teaching for a long time. And I see a lot of people who've been here for 10 years, 12 years. And I think that, that should be acknowledged because they're that much more qualified to continue to stay with the district and and help the kids the best they can when the teachers aren't able to be there.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Is there any other public comment? Okay. Moving on, we have item 3, Ms. Lombard, application for recognition of schools.
Sure, so this is just the annual application for recognition of schools that is done in September. At 2:30 this afternoon, though, we had a small change. We got an email from the ROE that no longer does the board need to approve them before they go forward, so that's more of an information item for all of you instead. But we've pulled the data. HR has given us the staff data, and we've gone through all of the policies and procedures. All of our schools will meet all of the criteria, and we'll go ahead and submit that and continue to be fully recognized at each of our buildings. So,
All right, thank you very much. All right, next item, we have to revision and adoption of the agenda. I'm always very slow at this, so please bear with me, and I'll probably still get it wrong. So, I know we have plenty of stuff on Finance Committee, Curriculum Committee. On 7.6, I'm going to pull that from the agenda, and we'll revisit that next month. So, Building and Grounds, Board of Education. I think that's it. Is there anything else that needs to be revised or adopted from the agenda? Okay, there being none, I will move to accept the agenda with the removal of item 7.6. Is there a second?
Second.
Second from Ms. Melendi. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that carries. All right, moving on. We'll go to the Finance Committee and turn it over to Mr. Quagliano.
Okay, Finance 5.1, debt refunding opportunity. Mr. Altmeyer, introduce your peoples.
Well, thank you very much. I am going to invite Eric Anderson from Piper Jeffrey and Bob Lewis from PMA up to give us an update, because there's currently an opportunity to continue our restructuring phases, and there is a current opportunity to restructure $6.095 million of the 2010 bonds maturing in January of 2025 that are callable this coming January 1st of 2019. So I'm just going to hand it off to them. We talked to the board about this last month. We did have a rating call a few weeks ago, and we will have both Bob and Eric provide an update as to where we are with that, as well as the opportunity to continue to move forward on this debt refunding.
Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you. So I'm going to lead the presentation, but Eric's going to contribute, and we'll tag team on this. If there's questions as we go through it, please feel free to stop us. The first page in the presentation, I assume all of you have this in front of you? Electronic version at least?
No?
Oh, you don't? No, I didn't make hard copies. Oh, okay.
Could we close that back? Might get a little better lighting in here.
Okay, if you want to go ahead and move to slide 3. Thank you. So slide 3 is a representation that is meant to help you, get an understanding of what factors impact the municipal bond market. I'm not going to read through all these here on this chart, but you can see that there's a variety of things there. As board members, members of the public, oftentimes when you hear about interest rates, you hear about Federal Reserve policy. What's the Fed doing? Well, while the Fed is important for the direction of interest rates, it's not the only thing that matters to the direction of all interest rates. So we have circled the Federal Reserve there as an important matter, but you'll see in the next slide when we look at the interest rate chart that the medium and the long-term rates don't necessarily follow the direction of Federal Reserve policy. The other item that we circled that's important as far as recent change in the municipal bond market is a change in federal tax law. At the end of last year, as you know, Congress passed a new tax bill that revamped the tax code the most it has revamped it since 1986. couple key elements of that impact the municipal bond market. One of those was the change of marginal tax rates for individuals and corporations. Individuals didn't change that much, but corporations went from 35 to 21%. So you may be wondering, well, what does that have to do with us when it comes to sell bonds? Well, when you sell your bonds, they are tax exempt, meaning your investors who buy them, the interest that you pay them, they don't have to pay taxes on it. Well, if you're a corporation whose marginal tax rate went from 31% down to 21%, you don't pay as much in taxes anyhow, so owning a municipal bond is not as advantageous to you as it was prior to tax reform. Now, thankfully, the investors in the municipal bond market, only about 30% of them are corporations, would be banks, casualties, insurance companies. The other 70% roughly are what we classify as retail or individual buyers, not necessarily directly holding it, but through exchange traded funds and separately managed accounts and other sort of products that are directed towards retail. The other important element of tax law change is it eliminated something called advance refundings, which was part of the program to restructure your bonds, was to take advantage of the bank qualification, which now isn't as advantageous as it once was because of tax reform, but also to take care of some of those non-callable cabs every year and on an advance refunding basis. Well, now you can no longer do advance refundings on a tax-exempt basis, so it's changed the program a bit and the timing of some of the issuances. It turns out that one of your bond issues is currently callable in the next few months here, which means we can do a current refunding. That's one that's within 90 days of the call date, which is why you're still able to do this next phase on a tax-exempt basis. The next slide is the graphical representation of the municipal bond market as represented by the Municipal Market Data Index. You see the 1-year rate, the 5, the 10, and the 20. Superimposed on the back of that is a gray area, which is the federal funds rate. And just to touch on what I mentioned on the prior slide about the Fed's influence on interest rates, you'll notice from 2009 to 2016, the Fed funds rate was unchanged. First longest period of time that the rate hadn't changed. The 1-year rate, the blue line, see how it's right on top of that for those 7 years? Obviously a very close 1-to-1 correlation. During that period of time, look at the 5-year rate, the 10, the 20-year rate. They were moving all over the place, which tells you all those other factors we had around that diagram are what's impacting those medium and long-term rates. So while the Fed has been raising rates, it doesn't necessarily mean the cost of your restructuring program is going to be more costly because the Fed is raising short-term rates. So while you may have to wait a little longer on the final phases of the restructuring program, which we'll talk about here in a moment, what those phases look like, the Fed raising short-term rates doesn't have to create a panic or a sense of urgency to do something sooner than you need to so that you can sell those bonds on a tax-exempt basis versus if you did something today, you'd have to sell them taxable, which means a higher interest rate. Okay? Because you notice the blue line has gone up to follow Federal Reserve policy, but your green line and your purple line, the 10-year rate and the 20-year rate, haven't gone up nearly as much and have been influenced by other factors taking place in the economy. Slide 5 is just a summary of those changes in the tax law. So I've already covered that, so we'll go ahead and move on to the next section, which is an overview of your debt. The district a few years ago, back in 2013, implemented it's right there in the top, implemented a restructuring plan. You'll see a moment here in a graph, your debt was going up rather precipitously on an annual basis because the assumptions made around the time of the referendum had not played out, which was not unique to Huntley 158. If you travel all the way up and down this corridor here, all the high growth districts, all of them had failing assumptions on their EAV growth. So the plan was adopted to allow the bond levy to increase by 3.5% per year to cut off some of those increases, and that 3.5% was based off the assumption, CPI historically is around 2.5%, about 1% new property growth each year. So you're just targeting that trend of the growth that you would experience. There's also some abatements that are occurring. We're fortunate to get one of the CDB grants, some of that which was used for some very important projects, which we got to tour the other day as part of the rating process, which were very impressive. But some of those dollars were used to abate some of the debt service of the district. So you did a major phase of the restructuring in 2013, eliminated some of the risks that rates would go up, got some of that locked down. You didn't go out and do all the years because that would have been cost prohibitive given some of the economic characteristics at that time. You've done a couple other mini phase refundings in 14 and 16. And 2017, a plan was implemented to take advantage of the bank qualification and do $10 million in 17. We're going to do another $10 million in 18, and also come back with this refunding opportunity we're talking about today. And Congress had other ideas and tripped up that plan. And then there would have been some subsequent phases in 20, I think 19 and 20. We ultimately have to finish it by 2021 because that's when the increase occurs, which you can see graphically on this next slide. So you have 3 years left, which we call in the rating presentation we call it the debt service wall, and that's what your structure. Had you not done anything, if you look at the years before then, it was kind of following that path. You've taken care of those years beforehand. The way the phases have been done, they've been done to manage your interest rate risk by taking the bonds and when you restructure and putting them out to the farthest section of the overall plan. We'll show you what the overall plan looks like here in a subsequent slide. And leave the middle area for the future phases because that helps to manage your interest rate risk. Because if rates were to go up, you don't pay back as much interest if the bonds they're not outstanding as long. So that's why you see the hole. So you can almost visualize this. You're going to take those 3 years and fill in that hole. Unfortunately, much of the bonds contained those 3 years are non-callable, so we have to wait. Now, there are a portion in 2023 is where these bonds that we're talking about tonight are scheduled to mature. So we're going to look at a strategy about trying to continue to minimize your interest rate risk by actually extending the payment on those bonds. And graphically, in a bit, you'll see that plan, and it should make sense. Your deadline to impact these 3 years is March 1st of 21, so that you can impact levy year 20. So we'll be coming and talking to you late 2020, likely, to talk about the plans. Probably not late 2020, probably mid 2020, about the plans that you will implement to take care of that wall. So what's the current refunding opportunity? I'm on slide 10 now. You have $6 million of the 2010 bonds that are callable on January 1st of 19. The interest rate on those bonds is 4.5%. Now remember what we said earlier about advanced refunding and current refunding. A current refunding is 90 days prior to that call date is considered a current refunding our tax law, so you can you can refund those bonds. So you back up 90 days, you get to October 1st approximately. So it means you can sell in September, close in October, which you'll see the timeline that we have in here somewhat follows that. You're going to be a little closer in 90 days if you decide to proceed with this plan, but you'll be within that current call window. So the next slide shows you where those bonds were to mature. That peach area represents the interest payments and the principal payments that would have occurred on these 2010 bonds. What we're proposing to do is take that principal payment and actually extend it out to 2034 and 35 to fill in a portion of the overall structure of the district's bond and interest levy. So if we go to slide 12, the picture explains this a lot better than the tabular presentation on the last slide. So 2023, you can see how we've lowered that amount down, and then we've moved the amount that was in there out to levy years 32 and 33. So what that does, it makes your hole bigger in the middle years, so then when you have to restructure 20, 21, and 22, you're filling in that hole you just made, and if interest rates were to rise, then you have minimized that risk because you filled in the back end of the structure with some of those payments. Okay? Now, you may be wondering, what is this going to look like then when we finish restructuring the rest of this when we get to late 20, 2021. That's the next slide. So you notice how the gray area in 2021-22 is removed, and then it fills in that hole, and there's a little bit of principal that goes in 28, 29, 30, but you no longer need to put any principal out in 32 or 33 to complete the restructuring plan because of what we did on this phase. But it also means you don't have interest rate risk on that portion of the restructuring plan because you've locked them in this year in the event that rates were to go up. Obviously, we can't predict the direction of interest rates, but if you're able to lock up longer bonds today, that always makes more sense to do that now than to wait to do it a few years from now. Is there any questions on the overall goals of this phase of the restructuring plan?
I remember when we first did this about 5 years ago. I got a huge education in it, and I'm sorry I don't remember a lot of the details. When we restructure these, are we locked in then? Are these non-callable? We can't, going forward in the future, if something looks like it's going to change, are we able to keep doing this, or are we stuck? I don't know if stuck's the right word, but are we locked into this trend?
No, your team's been very conscientious about making sure that the refunding bonds that you sell are callable. So unlike the cabs that you had to sell all those years ago.
That are not callable.
Right.
Those were not
All those
callable,
old
but
bonds.
any bond that you've sold, well, maybe not some of the shorter bonds, but any bond that has a length that's longer than 8 or 9 years has been sold with a call date. So you either A, would be able to refinance them to a lower interest rate when you get closer to the call date, or B, if you need to restructure, you could do it again, but without the cost of having to place bonds into escrow.
Right, and we had these because that's really all that was available to us when we were doing all the build out.
Exactly. A lot of high growth districts had to resort to using capital appreciation bonds for a variety of reasons during that time.
Okay, thanks.
I do have
Just as
Go ahead. No, go ahead. Finish your
Just as
thought.
one comment on this particular plan. It's I like how it's titled up at the top. It's a conceptual plan. So we already know what our actions will be for the final phases, those 3 years that we have to manage. But it's not necessarily true that we have to abide by the 3.5% increase. It's a flexible enough plan where the board, in each of one of those opportunities, can take a look and evaluate whether or not the 3.5% plan is still desirable to proceed with. You could flatten that out further. You could adjust for the realities at that time and what your expectations might be. So in conjunction with the refunding bonds that we did in 2013, which, a majority of which are callable, this issue and then one of our other issues, you still have lots of bonds that can be refunded in the future, either as Bob suggests, for interest rate savings or for restructuring purposes.
Right, because this is predicated on EAV growth is a huge piece of this. That's why 3.5% is chosen. EAV growth we're in the position we're in because we didn't have the EAV growth that was projected way back 15 years ago when a lot of this stuff was done. So that's fine. The other point on this is, you guys did a good job of leaving that gap in there because, highlighting you're mitigating interest risk by just having to go fill in shorter term years, so your interest rate risk is mitigated by not having to go out if long term bonds start to move out quite a bit. You can mitigate some of that risk. So this all works pretty good, as best it can.
And those orange columns, because when you go to sell those, they will be relatively short financings, 5 to 7 years in length. Those would likely be non-callable,
right? Which
is typical. If a bond's not going to be longer than 8 or 9 years, it's not callable. But that again fits within the plan. And that was a good point Eric made about the flexibility you have, because you could get to the point where maybe we looked at variations, concept plans about well someday will you need to new money, for instance. You've been very fortunate to address all your capital needs out of your operating funds or the CDB grant, and for the foreseeable future, it looks like that will still be the case, but maybe that's not 10 years from now. So one of the things you'd want to do before you do the final phase is take a very close look at your capital needs and what your plans may be for handling those needs over the next 10 years to see if any flexibility needs to be built in. But that sort of decision doesn't have to be made now, which is another reason why you don't want to rush to judgment and sell a taxable bond sale and get this done, because it gives you, again, every time you do the phase, it gives you an opportunity to rethink the plan.
Yeah, actually, you answered the question. I was going to ask about the 3.5%, the slope line that's there. So you took care of that before I even got to it. Thank you.
And just a quick question, what I'm struggling to follow is kind of the what's left after this one. And it's not, and maybe you've said it, but I haven't quite followed it, where, okay, I see the big
Page 11.
cliff wall coming up, and we're taking 6 million out of that, but I don't think there's anything left that says,
Yeah.
what's that graph look like with what's left to be refunded? Where's the new wall, and what does that look like?
Yeah, that's a very good point. The gray area,
Page
the
8.
3 years of the gray area, the height of that column is about $10 million, $10 to $12 million each year. So if you did it all at once, you're looking at about a $30 million, one more financing, and then it would be done. Or there's reason that maybe you do it one year by year, so they could all be done tax exempt, and then those would be individually around the $10 to $12 million financing.
Okay.
And I think page 8 points that out.
I'm not sure I'm following that, though.
You're taking this amount here and then you're spreading it out into these areas.
Yeah, you're implying this whole gray is the 6 million.
Right, yeah,
Yeah.
page 8, you're right, Mark, is a very good, that was a summary. It doesn't give you the dollar amount.
Just
like-
reallocating.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Plugging the holes.
So you're taking the whole three-pronged wall and moving it. That's what's
Right.
spreading clear. Okay,
Spreading it out.
Ultimately.
that's what I was getting.
And maybe not.
Which is nice because, one of the things when we presented to the rating agencies, we presented the plan is, a lot of times when you're doing a restructuring plan, one of the characteristics they look at is what's your 10-year payback percentage? How much of your principal will be paid off in 10 years? Well, if your restructuring plan, even when you're moving out those 3 years, you're filling in those holes right away, it doesn't change your 10-year payback percentage because it's paid back within 10 years. So that was very helpful on the rating. Unfortunately, we did do an analysis. Actually, Eric's team did an analysis on Moody's Investor Service, whether it makes sense to change the rating agencies so you get a fresh perspective and maybe come out with a better rating. We did get the answer today. Unfortunately, it's not public information yet, so we're not allowed to share it with you. Hopefully, Mark can shoot you an email tomorrow on that.
Smile or not smile?
I love the old
Well, I will
wink,
say,
nudge,
no, I
nudge.
better not say anything.
Bob and I were both commenting, we don't look good in orange.
Yeah, we don't want
So,
to.
so just to clarify, page 13 that I'm looking at,
Yes. That one.
that,
Yep.
after this deal, this is what it looks like.
Yeah, this is what it would look. No, this is what it looked like after all phases are completed.
That's what I'm asking. Is there a page 13 that says, after this deal, it looks like this?
Actually, yeah, I don't think.
Yeah, and I
that
think
does.
it's important to note that, we talk about that wall, having to address that wall by March, of 2021.
No, I know, I'm just trying to understand what that.
But we're not going to address all 3 years probably
No, all
at
I'm trying
once.
to do is get this picture after this deal. What does that
Oh, so
look
if you
like?
go back to slide 12, can you go back one slide?
So, okay, so it's beyond the wall.
Yeah,
Created a bigger, to use nice figurative language, the hole behind the wall got bigger to leave more room.
Right.
That's correct.
That's the
Now,
moat.
as time gets closer to the wall, we'll be able to still get the tax and benefit
Right.
and have big enough hole to put it in.
And mitigate interest rate risk, right.
Here, in case you decide to change the 3.5% trajectory,
I got you.
put it here, then you're gonna have to move it again later.
Yeah.
Yeah, yep, I got you. That was what I was looking for.
And we did look at just a straight up refunding to save interest expense right in that original year in which it was structured. And the decision was advanced, hey, you know what, makes sense to create a bigger hole to manage that interest rate risk that may or may not be present at the time that those next refundings occur. Especially because now we have to be more patient than we otherwise were planning to be.
Right.
Because of the new tax laws.
And then just out of curiosity, and maybe you can't answer it, but the philosophy behind a tax rule change, like why, trying to figure out why that makes sense.
Right. Well, prior to 1986, you could do as many advance refundings as you wanted. And when the 1986 tax reform came in, they allowed you to do one advance refunding. And the reason being is, let's say in 2010, you sold $50 million in bonds for projects, and those are callable in 10 years. 5 years, interest rates go down, you refinance those on an advance refunding basis. Well, when you do an advance refunding, what happens is the proceeds of an advance refunding go into escrow until they get to the call date. Well, the call date's still 5 years later. So for a period of 5 years, you have the original 50 million trading in the market, and then you might have maybe 40 million of those bonds are callable. So you have another $40 million in the market. So now you have $90 million worth of bonds for 5 years paying tax-exempt interest that finance the original $50 million bond issue. So what the IRS says, well, that's causing us to lose money, so we'll let you still do current refundings, but no more advanced refundings.
So this basically kind of in a roundabout way helps pay for a tax cut because.
Exactly. It's one of the so-called loopholes that they were trying to close so they could lower the tax rate.
Gotcha.
Now, there's been groups, our industry groups, that are continue to lobby Congress to try to get advance refundings back or some variation of it. The current head of whatever Ways and Means Committee, I think it is, maybe it was him, I can't remember who it, he's like, they're not coming back. But that's a Republican, so we'll see what happens after the election. Or maybe a different Congress may be more willing to bring those back.
Sure.
So now we're much more conscious about the call date we put on bonds. And there's been, I'd say, a market trend to shorten call dates from what they maybe were, I'd say 8 to 9 years, maybe 10 years, to shaving off a year or two, but that comes at a cost. It's not, getting a shorter call option isn't free. So what we've gone to doing is calculate, well, what's the debt service look like on 3 different call dates? And what if you never exercise that call? How much additional debt service do you pay through maturity in the event you're never able to exercise that call date? If you're able to exercise it 1 year sooner, it might be worth it. So it all then goes into how much additional debt service would you pay? And then it goes into your own probability analysis of whether you think you might be able to refinance that at some future date, whether you want to pay that extra interest cost to have a shorter call.
And then what's the current spread between taxable and non-taxable?
Depends on the year.
Yeah.
It widens out every year.
10
But
years.
to start off with, it's about 100 basis points or so.
Starts out at, meaning what maturity?
It's probably narrower than that and shorter, but
Yeah, a
as you
little,
go
yeah.
out.
I was looking at this.
Like 100
Yeah.
for like a 5-year, 10-year, or?
Well, it'd probably be 100 like right there. Like
Okay.
shorter the curve, it's going to be closer together. The longer you go out, the more it
right.
widens.
Okay. But right there meaning 5 or 1, 2, 3, 4,
Right.
5, 6 year,
Yeah.
5, 6 year rates would be about 100 basis
Yeah.
points
Well,
difference.
I'd say no more like where the 32 and the 33 maturities are.
Okay, that helps. Because ultimately the ultimate downside scenario is you get stuck having to do
Right. Yeah.
taxable basis before you really want to.
Yeah. I mean, you could restructure all this today and say, let's do it, but you're going to pay, we know you'll pay 1% higher,
Yeah,
roughly.
yep.
So the last slide we didn't cover is slide 14, which was the timeline of the key events. We delivered the credit presentation last week. We had a site visit. The administrator, I believe it was the administrator from the city came over. Is that right? And did the economic update, which was very helpful because the economy is 30% of your score. And we got the rating today, and you'll get to find it out tomorrow. And I apologize. If you're inclined to move ahead with this, you would pass the resolution on the 20th. Our goal is to sell the bonds around the 25th of September and close October 23rd, which is in that 90-day call window. Any other questions for us?
So the recommendation administration is seeking is approval by the board tonight to approve the timeline that is currently presented up on the screen to continue to move forward, and adopting the parameters resolution at the next board meeting on September 20th.
So you actually need a motion for us to approve the timeline?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, then there's no other discussion or questions.
Actually, a basic question.
Pardon? No, I was going to actually say if there was no more discussion or questions, I would like Mr. Quagliano to, yeah, to make that motion.
Actually, I'll belabor with another question. Rate-wise, what do we, it's getting 4.5 and dumping what? What's the, yeah. Because I think usually there's some sort of like fair value, present value calculation in here, but I don't see that.
Yeah, the rate would be, below 4, probably about 375 or so, give or take. I don't think we have it in here. We're not showing saving, like this isn't a refunding for savings.
Right.
So we're not showing any savings. The savings really come about from managing your interest rate risk.
Right.
But your rate's still going to be lower than 4.5. Would you agree with my approximation?
Okay. So
Yeah.
there's the refunding benefit, the rate risk management, but you're also,
Lowering
by
the
the way,
rate.
getting a lower rate as well.
Right.
Okay.
All
No,
right,
I'm done.
and now you're done? Any other further questions for them? All right, gentlemen, thank you for your fine presentation. You're free to leave.
Thank you.
We'll move on. Our Finance Committee. Actually, I need the Finance Committee peoples. We're all good, comfortable moving that forward, right? Because I think we're going to have to approve that at our.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
All right.
Yep.
All right, 5.2, our payables. We have our purchase orders, impress checks, disbursements listed. Any questions or concerns on those items?
Nope.
Okay, we'll move those forward to the board meeting. Item 5.3 is our revenue and expenditures report. Mr. Altmeyer, your summary.
Thank you very much. I'll make this brief. Within your executive summary, you have actually two executive summaries. You have the FY18 financial executive summary, the preliminary results of the FY18 audit. So I did want to make the board aware of where we are tracking based on audited results. The FY18 budget, the amended budget, reflected a budget of $504,992 as an operating surplus. Based on favorability within salaries and employee benefits, as well as favorability within purchase services and supplies and materials, the net operating surplus preliminary audited results show a operating surplus of $1.514 million. So, which is very good news. During the year we had well over $6 million of capital projects. Mr. Rankosik did a fabulous job this summer making sure that we got those in and done before the school year started, and that was a big part of the FY18 budget. So thank you to Mr. Rankosik and his team for doing that, and thank you to Debbie and the finance team for getting us through the audit with minimal entries, as she always does. But the district continues to perform very well and within budget. So once that preliminary draft is out, we will share that with the board, and we expect Evans, Marshall, and Peace to be here at the October board meeting to present the audit. So good news, good results, and it's kind of where we expected or wanted to be, because you can't forget, even though we have a net operating surplus for the FY18 budget of $504,000, we had set aside $500,000 for the reserve and replacement. So in a perfect world, if we're actually hitting our budget, we should end up with $1 million surplus because we didn't spend any of that line item, because that's the intent. And we ended up at 1.5 million versus the 1 million that we were hoping for. So again, just tracking within budget is always a good thing. So that's the results. I will let you review the July results, first month of the year. Not too much to report there. But I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
I have no questions. Anybody in finance have questions? Anybody else have questions concerning Mr. Altmeier's report and summary? Okay. There's no questions concerning that report. We will move on to item 5.4, which is revenue contracts. There's 2 of them listed there. Does anyone have any questions or concerns on those 2 contracts? So we'll move that forward to the board meeting. 5.5, monthly fiscal reports. Mr. Altmaier.
Nothing to add. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Yeah, we'll leave solar for Mr. Rinkozik. Yeah, so I have no further questions for Mr. Altmaier. Anyone else?
Down here.
All right. Finance is complete. Curriculum.
Thank you. 6.1, the Every Student Succeed Act. Dr. Schlichter.
Thank you. And we'll have Mr. Armstrong go ahead and bring up the presentation when he has a moment. So just by way of introduction, this is actually kind of like a Back to the Future kind of situation. So even before I started here, you probably heard quite a bit about the No Child Left Behind Act. That was one of our sort of areas in the past where we were trying to track accountability at the federal level and at the state level. Really, since about 2014, we have not been hearing as much, thank you, about federal accountability. And the main reason for that is because the federal government was trying to reauthorize the legislation, and then the state needed to work out the plan. So where we are right now is looking at our accountability system that we will be using from the federal government and then the state plan. So I'm going to let you know that this is like probably a little bit more detailed maybe than what we often go through, but real important for transparency, just to make sure that we all understand what's going to be reported. Just to give a sense of the big picture, the evidence-based funding, all kinds of ways that the grant system is being revamped. It's all linked. This particular component that we're going to talk about today, though, is known as the Every Student Succeeds Act, which is going to be our academic accountability. So essentially, again, just to kind of give a little bit of background, just starting at the very beginning, the Every Student Succeeds Act is the reauthorization of No Child Left Behind. And so while we had a few years off, you didn't hear us necessarily talking about, if you recall back to AYP and some of those pieces, this is the act that reauthorized it. And what I will say is that what the federal government was trying to do, and I believe it was a really good thing, was to basically maintain the good parts of No Child Left Behind and address some of the challenges that we had with it. So one of the good parts about it was that it really caused us to focus on subgroups. So way prior to No Child Left Behind, we really could just deal in averages, and a lot of our students would get lost when we were looking at accountability. So you'd have schools whose average scores might be fine, but they really were not accounting for the fact that some of their groups of students weren't excelling. The other piece that was good about No Child Left Behind was just simply the accountability feature. I remember when that started, I was a high school teacher at the time, and it seemed like a really big shift because before that we had been taking lots of tests, but nothing really ever came of it. So I think we're going to maintain that accountability, that focus on subgroups. One of the pieces that they did address that I think is very helpful is that with No Child Left Behind, and this was a huge criticism of it, it was one test, right? So it was the ISAT test, or later it would have been the PARC, and then it was the ACT or the Prairie State at the high school. And they essentially said, if a school gets above this line, they're going to make progress. If they're below the line, they don't. Well, we know it's much more nuanced than that. And so a lot of educators, but also parents and students were saying, well, wait, my child is more than one test, or our school is more than one test. And so this legislation aims to address that criticism as well by broadening the base of what we're going to be looking at. So just a little history, little trip through time here. Back in 2002 was when No Child Left Behind was passed. That seems like a really long time ago to me when I think back on my career. The idea behind No Child Left Behind was that all students would be meeting standards by 2014, which seemed like a long time in the future at the time that it came out. Well, by 2014, that was the state goal. That goal had not been met. All students weren't meeting standards across the state. So those yellow years were the years that they took off just a little bit to reauthorize. And it wasn't that accountability went away, but schools weren't being issued ratings, or they weren't being held to one line or one standard that was then published. So in 2017 is when the federal ESSA plan was approved, and then the state started work on our state plan. So essentially there's a federal law, and the state had to put together what has turned out to be a several hundred-page document, of course, right, that is helping us to meet the federal law, and it was approved. And last year was the first year of implementation. So what that means is they started tracking all the pieces that needed to be tracked. So this year, in October, is going to be the first time that it gets reported out. So this is why we're talking about it now in September. We just want to make sure that everybody has a good base of this, understanding where it's coming from, so that we can continue that conversation as we receive more information through the fall. So I won't read down through all of these. I put this slide in because I wanted you just to hear is they never gave us credit for high school graduation rate back under No Child Left Behind. And so actually our state plan very heavily weights the fact that the ultimate measure of success for a district is, are your students graduating from high school successfully? And so that's a piece that they're going to put into the plan. The other piece is that we're looking at our learning environment a little bit more. And so that is something, again, that's helping to broaden the base so that we're not just looking at our test scores. I think this actually, just as a side note, really aligns well with some of our philosophies. If you recall, when we piloted, I think we called it at the time the report card of the future, our H360, and that hasn't gone away because through personalized learning, we're really looking at those learner profiles. I think it goes along with everything we believe here in Huntley, which is that we need to be looking at different components of our students. We shouldn't just be looking at one aspect. So basically, and this is where we get to the part that's a little bit more technical, but essentially, the way that the state does this is instead of saying you get a percentage and you're either above a bar or below a bar, what they do is they're putting multiple indicators into one overall index score, and it's out of 100. And so they basically say there's all these indicators, they're weighted at different amounts, they all add up to an index score out of 100, and what they do is they do two things. They rank all the schools in the state, so K-8 is one group, and high school is another group, so that does mean that like Chesapeake and Heinemann are in the same group. It's true because K-8 is one group. So they rank them, and then they look at subgroup performance. And they're going to be issuing every school, not district, but just each school in the state, a summative designation. And it's based on those two features, where they fall in the ranking of everybody in the state, and then how their subgroups are doing. So the other piece where I said that we are going to be measuring more than just our tests is where you see down in that second main bullet point, there's going to be core academic indicators. That's going to be 75% of the overall. But then they have a whole set called school quality indicators. And those are some of those components like attendance, things that are going to show us school quality but not necessarily be a test score. And so this is just a little graphic that shows you what some of these academic indicators are. The gray science one in the little gray circle is just gray because it doesn't exist yet. They're not including that yet, but it will ultimately. So if you look, a large one at the K-8 level is English and language arts and math growth. And so again, it's not just did you meet a bar, but it's how have your students grown. At the high school level, a big one is high school graduation rate. And then also what we're looking at is English language arts proficiency. That is, did we meet a bar on PARCC or on SAT? But as you see, the size of the circles are a little bit correlated to how much they're weighted. That's weighted a lot less. So it is important that we're still meeting proficiency and getting above a cut point, but that's not all there is to it. And then also our English learners and how they're progressing toward proficiency. Our school quality indicators, as you can see, they're not all ready to go yet, but this is sort of the plan for the future from the state. As of right now, the main school quality indicators that are included for this year that you'll see in October are just two. So it's the rate of chronic absenteeism is what the state calls it, and that's essentially a student who has 10 or more absences of any type. The only group of absences they exclude is homebound and hospitalized. So we don't know what that's going to look like. The state doesn't know what that's going to look like. They do assume that quite a few schools across the state will have fairly high rates of that, because 10 absences for field trip, vacation, being ill, all those excused absences might still, not field trip, but the vacation, the excused doctor's appointment, all of that might count. So they're going to be looking at that. And then 9th grade on track, that's essentially our 9th graders who are earning credits on track to graduate on time. And then I have some of the same things just in a little different format so you can see how it adds up. For the K-8 band, it's that growth that's the big piece. And then for the 9-12 band, it's the graduation rate. That's the big piece. And if it does seem a little bit sort of in the weeds that they're putting such specific percentages and some of them kind of small, it may be. In the end, some of those may not affect the overall score all that much, but I think the state was really trying to sort of spread across to make sure that we're looking at multiple indicators. I will tell you that states got together as they were looking at creating these plans, and the feedback we got was that Illinois' plan was actually one of the more complicated plans in the state or in the country. So it's complicated. But again, I do think that the intention was good. And this is, again, just a different representation so that we can see really, really clearly that the graduation rate, 50% at the high school level, and then growth at the elementary level. So overall, those are going to be some of our main indicators. So the next question is then, how do they take those? So for example, let's say we have a 94% graduation rate. How do we take that and mash it together with all the rest of the indicators to get us to an index score? And that's the component that I'm going to say to you is probably the least straightforward from the state. So essentially what they do is they take all those indicators. The piece that to me is the least transparent is your 94% graduation rate. There is a set of statistical rules that they use. They call it the business rules to transform that 94% graduation rate into an indicator score, and then they just weight it and they start adding on the list. So every one of these indicators that you saw, all those circles, has a different set of rules by which they turn it into an index score. So it's sort of like a little packet for each of them. Dr. McCrindle has been very excited to be digging into that. She's actually doing a fantastic job with it, hitting the ground running in her new role. But what I will say, it makes it very difficult for us to just go and predict where we're going to be, just simply because of the calculations that would be involved. So essentially what they do is they calculate the school index score. Makes sense. It might be a little tough to predict, but yeah. So we get an index score out of 100. And then what they do is they rank order all the schools in the state from highest all the way down to lowest at that K-8 band and at the high school band. Okay, that makes sense. Then what they do is they draw a line under the top 10% of schools. So you got your top 10%, you got everybody else. Then the next thing they do is they draw a line over the bottom 5%. So they're sort of separating out the top tier and the bottom tier. So far, so good. Then the next thing that they do, and this is all what they're doing to get to the summative designations, then they look at subgroups. So essentially, any school district that is in that top tier, that top 10%, and has no underperforming subgroups, that school will be an exemplary school. Okay, that makes sense. If that exemplary school has one underperforming subgroup, it becomes an underperforming school. The next tier, that big middle tier, top 10%, bottom 5%, that whole middle, they are called commendable schools, again, unless they have an underperforming subgroup, in which case the school is designated underperforming, and then that bottom 5% is designated lowest performing. So as they calculate these pieces, this is a little graphic from the state. They have some funny names of these fake schools up there, so you can take a look and see if you can find them. We have just a middle school down there in the bottom 5%. But essentially, you can see you've got your top 10%, you've got everybody in the middle, you've got your bottom 5%. Are you pointing out just a middle school, Dr. Rowe? That's a good one. I know. I probably would have made them a little funnier if I was actually making the list, but again, the graphic kind of gets the point across. So they rank them, steps 1 and 2. They do their subgroup designation, and then they figure out where the subgroups are falling, and then they give us our summative designation. So the next step or question that we asked when we started digging into this with the state is, well, what makes a subgroup underperforming? So how do we know if a subgroup is underperforming? What's the cut point for that? So again, this is one of those pieces that gets a little bit technical, but what they say is that a subgroup is underperforming if that subgroup is lower than that purple line that's at the top of the lowest 5%. So if a subgroup in any school in the state is underperforming the all students group in the lowest 5% cut, that subgroup is underperforming. And so they've done all of these calculations, and then they apply a designation. And if that seems like a little bit of an arbitrary cut or designation for subgroup, it may be. I have not heard an explanation of the why on that yet, but that's what they're using as their explanation.
Can you just state that again? Just to
and actually, I'm going to go to this slide because it actually states it out. So a subgroup, if the subgroup is under the underperforming, oh, sorry, thanks. Yeah, I'm not on the same computer yet. If a subgroup is performing lower than the all students group in the lowest 5% of schools in the state, then that subgroup is underperforming. So it's a little, in the whole school. Then the whole school is underperforming. So if we look at these designations, as you start at the top and go to the bottom, you'll see a little bit of a trend. So exemplary schools are just schools in the top 10%, no underperforming subgroups. That's an easy one to see. Commendable schools is any school that has no underperforming subgroups. It's not in the lowest 5%. It has that minimum graduation rate, and it's also not in the top 10%. So there's going to be a lot of commendable schools in the middle as long as they have no underperforming subgroups. The thing that we think is really interesting about this is that the underperforming designation is not a whole school. There is nothing about an overall school rating that causes it to be underperforming. Our overall number for the school doesn't even factor in. It is only based on subgroups. So if you read that definition, there's going to be schools that would either toggle between exemplary or commendable and underperforming based on subgroups. And again, they're trying to have that accountability to make sure that we're looking at how our subgroups are performing and closing the gap. And so I think that that's, again, a commendable goal. I think probably, at least for a little while, as we get used to how they're calculating it, it might be a little bit confusing as it comes out in the wash. And then lowest performing is obvious. It's just the schools that are overall in that lowest 5% in the state. Yeah, Leslie?
So if within a district the size of ours, it's possible to have one school that's underperforming and several schools that are exemplary or commendable?
Correct.
So it doesn't go district, it's actually
It's
school
just
by school.
And I'm glad you asked that question to bring it out, because that's actually one of the pieces of advocacy that some of our advocate groups really did lobby for. It's not inequitable to our students to focus on subgroups, but when you say any school that has a population of 20 or more of one student group, that's a subgroup. Essentially what we're saying is any school that's big enough to have that many students is going to be more likely than a school that's smaller. I mean, we have schools that are large. So our schools ultimately might overall be outperforming by far maybe a school downstate that's real small, but they don't have any subgroups, so their rating is different. Does that make sense? And again, it's not an inequity for our students. It's great that we're focusing on the subgroups, but when you're starting to publicly rank schools in that manner, it just becomes a little bit difficult. And I will tell you, I suspect we're going to be seeing that even within our own district, because we do have larger schools and smaller schools. And so that's the type of thing that we should expect as we move forward. That was a great question. Yeah, Ms. Walker.
So my question is, if one subgroup is underperforming, then it automatically means that the school is underperforming.
Correct, the entire school. So when we see a designation of an I didn't really ever think of it this way before. Any school that you see a designation of underperforming, the actual assumption is that the school would have been commendable or exemplary, except there was a subgroup that underperformed, which again is not okay. And we don't ever want to talk about it like it's an excuse or like we would have been fine except for that subgroup, because that is not what we're implying. But just to be real clear, it is not that the whole school's underperforming. Absolutely.
Yeah, and again, keep in mind, in order to get there, you got to be in the lowest 5%. It means there's 95% better than you in that category. So that's why they're saying you can't be a commendable or exemplary school district if you have something that poor that you're doing it. So I follow it.
Exactly.
I don't have a problem with that.
And I think from an accountability standpoint, it makes sense to us. And we're just like I know some of you are on the board as there was no child left behind, and it happened in every school district. As schools did not make AYP, there was that aspect of wanting to explain it, but there's also the aspect of saying we own it and we need to get better, and that's what we need to do.
I mean, an interesting side effect of this is that there's no distinction between an exemplary school with one underperforming subgroup and a commendable district with one underperforming subgroup.
Correct.
So it's like here's,
exactly,
for lack of a better term, no credit for being exemplary. And
yeah. So you could be the lowest commendable school or the highest exemplary school, and you're both just underperforming, right?
Right.
Yeah, because of that. There's I think definitely those components are the pieces that have been really the cause for some controversy in some of our groups, our Chicago area groups that we are a part of, LUDA. Again, it's not that we don't want that accountability for our subgroups, but it's just how are we doing with this public reporting and making sure that it's transparent and accurate and fair, I think, to schools. So here's sort of the million-dollar question, right? So where are we, and what does this mean for us? So the state is, what we've been describing here are these summative designations coming out in October. What the state did do is they released to us what they're calling preliminary designations. They did that back in July. I will tell you that they surprised everybody with it. They sent us a letter, and it was like, wow, that's a good letter. Thank you. We could have used a little heads up on this. And the reason that they sent us preliminary designations in July is because the federal law stipulated that school districts or the state needed to inform school districts if schools were underperforming before the start of school. Well, the state of Illinois does not have their data ready from the prior year at that time. So what they did is they used 2016, 2017 data, so it was old data, because they were required to issue a preliminary designation. So they did. And it was also not very many of those indicators because they just weren't ready. So it was a very limited data set that they used, but they did in fact issue us that preliminary designation. The preliminary designations, the state's letter was quite positive because they were explaining all the great benefits. So we do receive some school improvement grant money that we can use if we have a school that's an underperforming school. We did have one school in our district that did come back as an underperforming school, and that was Marlowe Middle School. And so after a little bit of investigation, that was due to our English learner progress to proficiency for that subgroup. So just to put that in perspective, for Marlowe, that is just that in that year. Now we are growing. I think, as you know, we're growing significantly in our English learners, but for 2016, 2017, that was just slightly over 20 students. And the state is looking at how quickly they exit their EL program. So in other words, how quickly, once you start in Illinois, the state wants students exiting ESL services in 5 years. So they look at our students on track to do that. So that's that metric that they use. So that is the letter that we got in July. And of course, we immediately were not happy to see that. And we started working with Mr. Venetico, who was new at that time at Marlowe, obviously, working with the curriculum directors and working with our district office cabinet to make sure that we understood it, and then looking at steps to take going forward. So just to give you an idea, it was very limited data that went into that. Again, just to be totally transparent, they had no growth for K-8. They had nothing really. It was truly just how did we do on PARC, and then that English learner project to proficiency or progress to proficiency. That was for K-8. For high school, they had a little bit more available because obviously we have the high school graduation rate and so forth already in place. Again, that was preliminary. And so that did put Marlowe into that underperforming category. Now, what that does mean for us is that Marlowe will complete a school improvement plan, which for us is just fine because all of our schools are completing school improvement plans. The accountability for that school improvement plan is with the district. So there's no big state template or super cumbersome state form we have to fill out. We have a good solid improvement process and we're going to keep using it, and we're going to help Mr. Venetico go ahead and fill that out as he's new to the district. We do have federal funds, $15,000 designated just for Marlowe. And so we can target those funds toward professional development, and then that's a main need. We've already started looking at that need in Marlowe. And actually our teachers are just fantastic because we shared this information with them. Last week, Mr. Venetico did a great job. Dr. Rowe was there, Dr. McCrindle was there, I was there, and the teachers just looked at that and there was they were sad, they were not happy to see it, none of us are, but there was no defensiveness, there was no making excuses, it was just what do we need to do to improve, and they started tossing out ideas, very, very passionate about helping our English learners, and so that was great to see. So some specific improvement initiatives, and actually a lot of these were already taken before we got this designation in July, but just as a little reminder. So in 2017-2018, this past year, which is the year after they pulled the data for that preliminary designation, if you recall, part of when we implemented dual language, that was actually part of a larger ESL and language review. So we've implemented now tiered push-in instruction for English learners. That was happening regardless of this designation. As you know, we've added staff, and specifically added staff to Marlowe, which was a need that we identified, again, even before we got that designation. So that, I think we are on the right track. We were seeing that need anyway. Something that we are very, very excited about is that we believe, as soon as our federal grants get approved, the ability to do a second ESL endorsement cohort. So if you recall, we have a whole group of staff, about 30 staff members, that are becoming endorsed and licensed as ESL teachers, and we're funding that through our Title II grant. If our grant proceeds as we think it will, we are going to have the ability to run a whole other group of staff with that. And again, we're getting a lot of interest from our Marlowe teachers, which I think is fantastic. We did before as well, which again, I think is great because we're aligned with the needs for kids. So in terms of what we're doing, I think that what we've identified aligns, certainly maybe not in the designation in the way it's described, but I think it aligns with where the state has identified the need. Very passionate about it, very, very focused on that improvement and already taking steps, and we'll certainly keep the board informed of that. So the next thing that we are going to hear is in October. Now they just said October, but now recently I heard late October, so I'm not actually sure which committee of the whole will be able to share this with you in. They will be releasing the Illinois School Report Card. They said they will let us know about a week before it's released publicly, so we'll certainly keep the board informed. They did tell us two things that are important. One is that our preliminary designation is not likely to change. So while it could change from underperforming to commendable or exemplary for Marlowe, looking at our data and the reasons why it was the way it was, the state just told us, and we're working with a consultant down there, they just said it's not likely to change. So just be aware of that. Even if it changes, they're not going to withdraw the funds though. So we will have that school improvement grant to spend in Marlowe this year regardless. And then we're just going to continue to keep monitoring and working with our families and working with our students and our teachers to make sure that we're moving in the right direction and keeping everybody abreast as new information comes forward. So with that.
So before we open that up to
Yeah.
discussion, I just wanted to add that I wanted to thank Dr. Schlichter and her team because what she didn't tell you was that she had to lob on with a number of districts in the area and actually FOIA this information from the state of Illinois because it wasn't readily available when we asked for it. They couldn't explain to us in detail what we needed to know so that we could appropriately respond to support Marlowe and explain to our families, which a letter that we'll be sending out tomorrow will be doing so. But there's a lot of work has gone on behind the scenes in order to give this to, which is why we elected to go as detailed as we did in terms of the explanation, because it really is a big deal. This ESSA Act is huge, and it's going to drive us in our improvement for the next number of years. So it's important that we all have a very deep understanding of it, because this is going to be an annual report we make. But it is unfortunate that the state wasn't prepared enough to give us the information that we needed when we needed it, when they sent us into a state of alarm to tell us that one of our schools was underperforming.
In fact, what they told us is the process is you just need to call us and ask. I said, okay, so 800 districts are calling you and asking why they're underperforming. Yeah, there was no process for that.
And I would say that immediately following, I was contacted by almost every district in McHenry County, saying that they had at least one school that was underperforming. So we're definitely not alone in this. And overall, as a school, Marlowe, like our other schools, perform very well. It's just we have work to do when it comes to English language learning, which we already knew. Thank you.
Oops, if there's any further questions or anything right now that we want to follow up on, I'm happy to take questions. Yeah.
It's not a question, more of a comment. So when we talk about English as a second language and we're dealing with our children in schools, that's understandable because a lot of them come and they don't speak English at all. And so, of course, we're teaching them from beginning to end, you know, flashcards, reading, hearing, everything. But I also know that sometimes when you're dealing with the children, we also need to be kind of dealing with their families. And so it's one thing to deal with our kids every day and to teach them, but when they go home, if the parent can't help them with the homework or they can't understand the language either, and I know we can't educate all the parents, but is it possible that because we're doing bilingual programs anyway, that we could maybe put something in their native language on our Chromebooks or on our page, the Power School, so that the parents can go to and look at, and then at least maybe they can understand. You know, does that make sense? So if
Absolutely.
Whether it's Spanish or whether it's Greek or whatever whatever Polish, whatever the language is, if you could put it in their native language on the Power School app and kind of the instruction that you're giving the kid in English, and they can read it in their native language, then maybe they can help explain it to their child because now they can read it in their own language. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
So
yeah.
that was just a suggestion that I know that in my everyday job, we deal with people that have, that are coming to the country and they have no, way of speaking to us, and it's kind of pointing and showing and learning from scratch. And so what we've learned is that sometimes if you give them both and then explain it to them in English, they get it more rapidly. So that's what made me think of the idea of maybe putting it in their native language on Power School so that the parent can at least assist the child, because now they can read it in their native language and then, translate it and be able to help them.
And that's a great suggestion. We continue, and Dr. Del Castillo is constantly in my office looking for ways, and we have a lot of languages to translate to, so Spanish is the easy one, honestly, when you look at translation. But yeah, the more that we can do that, technology can help sometimes, depending on the language, right? Because the homework, you can sometimes use an auto translator and things like that. But yeah, that is a constant need, so I'm glad you brought that up. The other one that I'll mention is that we have our Bilingual Parent Advisory Council, which is it's a federally mandated parent group that you have that's connected to some of our title grants. But what I'm going to tell you is that the way we do it here is just not the basics of federally mandated. So I've started attending. Dr. Rowe attended. Dr. Del Castillo has turned this into a gigantic parent support group. There are sometimes 40 or 50 people in the room. We have speakers that come in. And it's really a family. There's food all over the place and music playing, and then we have a speaker, and it's really a place, I think, where our parents have been able to network and help each other with some of those. They'll share, it is exhausting for a student that can't speak the language. The day is exhausting, and they'll be able to share some of those strategies with each other. So that has just been great to see. I think that they're really feeling welcome, and Dr. Rowe, I know when you attended, they just had very kind words. They have felt like with our dual language program, with some of our outreach that Dr. Del Castillo has begun, and they feel like this is a district where they are welcome and they want to be. And I think that just makes me so deeply happy when I hear that. It's great to hear.
Any other questions or comments?
So I'll chime in. I understand the need to take ownership and accountability. There's a part of me that is troubled by all of this, in the context that that particular subgroup now paints a stigma on a school, and so to the press, to people who don't get into the details of how this all transpired and look at it from just a 10,000 point view and say, oh, that school is, you know, that particular category, that lower category, without digging into the data to understand this is how it arrived and this is how the calculation is done, and going down those rabbit holes. And it troubles me that now, in my eyes, I'm expecting a whole lot of schools to be painted with a very broad brush. And despite the good things that go on in the schools and the high standards that we do have and the goals that we do have, to me it all seems like it becomes for naught because of that broad brush. And that troubles me. And I know that that's nothing that you can control or anybody else can control. It just feels like disjointed in some respects. And so that's just my 2 cents.
And you know, I think that for us, where we land on that, and it's working with Dan Armstrong as well, because I think it's how we communicate and how we help our families process that in our community. And it really is a fine line, because nobody wants to have anybody pointing the finger at a subgroup like it's their fault we're underperforming. No, that is not it.
Correct.
Or making excuses, because we do own it. If we need to improve, we need to improve. But you're right, it's balancing that message and making sure that we keep emphasizing the positive as well. So ultimately, when we finally get the actual scores that we hopefully don't have to do a Freedom of Information Act request for in the future, we would be able, if we so chose, to release where the scores are. And so what you would see, they gave us sort of like a tentative preliminary idea once Dr. McCrindle got on the phone for several hours. And what we saw is that Marlowe's overall score was no different than any other school's score. They're very high. It was just, again, how do we message that to make sure that we're striking that balance? I understand completely what you're saying. It doesn't feel right, which again is that the basis of that advocacy when we said, even in our district, based on the size of our school and our EL populations in the different schools, I'm going to predict that we may end up having at different times some of our schools underperforming and some not, may even have flip-flopped overall scores, but just, again, because of the way that they're ranking those, and I think it's just to be clear in that communication. It's best we can do.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, just a quick comment too. I think it just communication challenge / opportunity to really tell the full story. And I think just reading through this and listening tonight, I think this package does a great job of explaining what. And I think that's great, because it's pretty clear what it is and what it's not, which I think will be a good foundation for that communication when it all starts to kind of percolate out in the outside world. No, nice work.
Yeah, my comment is kind of dovetailing off of what Paul said. That is all true, but of course, if you're in that group, even if it's 20 students that need that attention, it'd be, without this, it might be pretty easy to just kind of forget about that or not give the focus on it that it needs. So that's the double-edged sword that we have here. I'm more troubled with the fact that we've got this federal program. The state goes to institute something. They have to have data to comply with the federal law. They're making us be scored with old data with a scheme that's not even completely developed by the state. And this is crazy. It's like playing a game of baseball but using last year's at-bats, and the rules aren't completely done yet. So hopefully in a year or so this will make a lot more sense, but I appreciate everything that the administration did to try and make sense of this and to do something useful with it. So thank you.
Yeah.
Just kind of touching on what the guys said down there, which is true, that about the subgroups, like you said, nobody wants to be pointing fingers or making them feel like they are the reason that we're here, and that's very important. So thank you for doing a great job of dissecting the information and breaking it down so that we can understand it. And when Dr. Rowe writes to the families, that hopefully they'll understand it the same way that we did. But more importantly, I think that when the subgroups realize that we are more concerned and we are more willing to assist them, they'll do the work even more, because now they know that they have the support and that we are all trying to help them, to help us so that we don't get that broad picture. So that's just what I wanted to say about it.
All right, thank you for that presentation, and then we move on to 6.2, the CTE Pathways conceptual presentation. Dr. Schlichter again.
My mic's off. I'm going to ask Mr. Reauthorization to come forward because he's going to be partnering on this. And actually, this will be kind of a collaborative presentation. I'm going to start it off. Mr. Reauthorization is going to take it in the middle, and then we are going to have Mr. Beelan here for questions. Mr. Johnson, our new director for 612, we've all kind of worked collaboratively on it at the end. So I go from actually normally doing no PowerPoint presentations to doing 2 in one night. It's very special, right?
You've reached your quota for the year.
I know. Mr. Altmaier's probably definitely saying that same thing. So essentially what we're doing tonight is something that's a little bit out of the ordinary, but just to sort of preface the entire thing, we have some really exciting ideas, and I'm going to hand it to Mr. Reauthorization for doing some work with his department. He's our CTE department chair at the high school, and really coming up with some innovative ways to think about pathways in CTE, career and technical education, for our students. Having said that, we like to dream big in Huntley, as you know. We like to innovate, and so some of our ideas could be taking us down some paths that we just, at this time today, before we get too far into the planning, we just want to share some of those paths and the general idea with the board, just to get a consensus. You'll see in the agenda, it doesn't say, it's not an action item for voting in our meeting, but we are going to ask for any board members who have significant concerns that would be barriers to proceeding to just let us know, because through these next few months and into the spring, before we report on our CTE review, we'll be doing a lot of work to really flesh out some proposals. And if there's anything that we want to take off the table, we would just want to know that tonight. We're also just really excited about this, so we're excited to share. So with that, our purpose tonight, like I said, is pretty standard in some ways. We have a curriculum review proceeding. We know what a curriculum review is. This one's a little different because we're reviewing our curriculum. We're looking at standards, making curriculum maps. We're also reviewing our programs. And so that really is where we are looking at that programming piece, because we could change it a little, we could change it a lot, and we have some pretty big ideas that we want to determine the viability of. So what are pathways? When we use the term pathways, what we are essentially saying is a pretty simple concept. It sounds kind of fancy, but essentially what it is that we would be creating pathways of study, not exactly like the academies. They're not going to be built out with all those courses like our medical and engineering academies. But what we would be doing is looking at several pathways culminating in either a dual credit, articulated credit, some kind of industry certification. Ultimately, we have some ideas where we would love to see some of these end in a dual degree so that they could graduate high school with an associate's degree. So we're really looking forward to some of that college and career readiness. And you see up there that we have several pathways that we're looking at. One quick note, you're going to see engineering appearing up here, and I don't want that to be confusing. This isn't replacing our engineering academy in any way. It's sort of a little bit adding to it. We're going to be thinking about potentially some engineering classes that might be in the CTE department that might just add a little bit to the academy. So that's not to be confusing. The rest of them are a little bit of a larger build. So the review is going to be centered around, again, building out this programming and also reviewing the curriculum. The main focus and the main purpose of looking at this is there are absolutely college and career opportunities for our students in these areas that we're just right now not maximizing. So students are taking the classes and they're going on to college and studying, and we've been in contact with some of those students. Also, a lot of industry leaders that are giving us the feedback saying we need employees in these areas. We need the schools to partner to be able to provide more training and get kids ready for some of those post-secondary opportunities. So the goals of CTE Pathways, why would we have them? Like I mentioned before, it's a college and career readiness link. The dual and articulated credit, you're going to be seeing coming forward, and you'd probably see this even if we didn't have a Pathways concept. We've really been working with McHenry County College and honestly pushing them quite hard. Dr. Rowe's been instrumental in that to open up the opportunity for more dual credit. And as you know, we add them as quick as we can. As soon as we can get our instructors certified, we like to add that dual credit option. So that would be one of our goals with this. We also want to make sure that our CTE courses align vertically, something that is not at all uncommon in schools, and I'm saying this having worked in quite a few districts. In the CTE department in particular, it's an umbrella, but there's so many different types of classes that are in there. It's our foods and nutrition classes and our automotive classes and our computer classes. And what happens in a lot of school districts is courses get added, but they get added maybe a little bit more piecemeal over the course of 15 years, 10 years, because we see interest in students, and so we add them. And lo and behold, 15 years down the road, you realize that you have a lot of really great courses, but it's not allowing students to streamline. And so that's one of the goals of this review. And then also, this is an area of literacy that is actually very, very prominent when industry literature or literature needing to be read to be successful in some of these industries. It's actually, in some cases, of a much greater complexity than the literature that's needed in a college freshman English class. I mean, I'm thinking those manuals to repair a car. I really don't know how many of us could just go in cold, read that, and repair a car based on our understanding. And so our students really have that high need. So Mr. Wiedoff has really put a ton of passion and energy and enthusiasm into building out some of our pathway concepts. And so Mr. Wiedoff is going to talk to us about the pathways and also some of the potential implications. Again, knowing that this presentation tonight is just to present the concept, get some initial feedback, and make sure that none of these move into an area that we'd want to take off the table before we do further work. So with that, I'm going to toss it over to Mr. Wiedoff.
Good evening. Thank you for letting me speak here tonight. What we spent some time trying to research is finding out what industry wants out of our students, what students want to go into in college, and where those wants and needs balance. I think that's very important to have in mind.
Is your button pressed?
It is lit. Is that better? Well, okay. There was a joke about that earlier. We'll just get louder there. All right. So, no pun intended, but we very are much looking forward to retooling this department and trying to shape that with the current needs of the economy and it's Huntley itself. So it's been a fun process finding out what companies in town are looking for out of our students and what college paths they want to pursue. So some of the pathways that we've looked at, we have computer programming now. We have a great sequence of AP computer science classes, but it doesn't necessarily prepare them for a degree or a job in that field. We're not perpetuating the careers that we ourselves are working in. So we would like to propose a computer programming pathway as well as a computer technician pathway. Sorry if I'm skipping around, but I get really excited about this. It's good stuff. We would like to build in CompTIA certifications where kids can prove their knowledge in computer repair, computer programming languages. We would like to have A+ certification. We'd like to get networking classes. We've had a few students have gone to the military and gone into computer science and not had any coursework to support that, and they felt very behind in the curve in trying to pick that up getting into the service. They had the aptitude for it, but not the training behind it. Family Consumer Science, we would like an education pathway, somewhere where we can build kids progressively to get into an internship where we could place them in a grade school or a middle school and get a micro teaching in and be able to help out with our students and maybe provide a fresh lens in some of those classes. We would like to build out culinary arts. We've talked with MCC and working on some dual credit options there. just trying to get kids into those careers. We have a lot of large bakeries in the area that would happily take our students, but they need credentials behind them to be able to apply for those jobs. Business, we have accounting set up now. We have some marketing classes, entrepreneurship, I'll talk to you a little bit in that, but we'd like to change the way that looks, and we'd like to be able to bring current business leaders into the high school to help facilitate classes and get kids more real-world firsthand knowledge of what is going on out there and less theory, be able to have them develop and design a product and be able to promote that. Engineering, we have a phenomenal academy. We would just like to maybe tweak it real small and add a few options based on needs in the community. And then within applied technology, we would love to design a pathway that would allow us to further explore the automotive industry. We've got a lot of kids that want to go work with Tom Peck, but don't necessarily have the skill set to get those careers that would allow us to have a livable wage, let's say. They're changing oil to start out with, and we'd like to get them to be able to apply for a base automotive position, as well as manufacturing. And then a lot of these areas offer certification in them, which is going to allow our students to have a much better command, to be able to move up a few ranks in the company and really be able to shine in a pile of applicants. So those are opportunities we would like to be able to extend to our students. Along with that, there's some logistical issues. We have a great base of class, but we need to add to that. We need to bulk that up, especially at the top end of things. Ideally, we'd like to be able to build in some internship opportunities, which is going to take some inroads into some companies and definitely some relationship building. We have a phenomenal staff of really dedicated people that a lot of them have spent some time in the industry and bring good things. But as you could tell, that was a wide array of courses that we just talked about there without getting into specifics. We may fall short on staffing there, so we might have to do some creative things to make that work. Facilities. We got the confines of the building. Well, there's some things that we can do there, and we may need to retool some things and try to figure out some space issues. As far as specific examples of courses that might fall into these pathways with computer science, furthering our 3D animation and gaming. We brought in some phenomenal new tools to that, and it's really struck up an interest with kids. Networking, computer repair, ethical hacking, trying to show kids the right way to go about things. I'm sure you know lots of stories there. Family computer science, we'd like to get into catering. I think it would be phenomenal if we could get kids to provide the food that we use at meals. Not meals, meetings, sorry. Obviously food at meals. Child studies, internship, getting the kids out into the classes. Business, there's a phenomenal program that we would like to be able to present to you this spring, if possible, business incubator. It really shows kids what the business world is like and removes the theory because they're living in it, and that's probably another meaning. Engineering, we have kids that really want to get into robotics, but we're only able to spend a real small little unit on that, and there's so much more to be explored there, as well as computer integrated manufacturing. I'm sure everything you've seen manufacturing-wise is automated, and all the robotics and animatronics that goes into that, we would like to be able to show the kids that in an industry standard level. And then with applied technology, we've started construction this year with geometry and construction. It's going really well. The kids are super enthused about building things that are going to exist within district facilities, and there's a lot of pride on that, and we'd like to expand on that. Automotive theory, we've got some inroads with MCC, and we'd like to fulfill that. It's tough getting kids from school to MCC to take the coursework, and there's some financial things there as well, but if we could do more within our current facility and expose kids to that more fully, I think it would just serve more kids in a better way, and definitely reach more students. Same thing with manufacturing. I've gotten calls, companies in town looking to hire CNC operators and computer programmers, and I have to say that right now I don't have the coursework to give you a job applicant that has any training and would be able to fill that need right now. I would really like to change that conversation because those businesses are definitely interested in our students.
So our implementation that we'd be looking at for this, again, just to give you sort of the broad boundary outline, we would certainly not be bringing forward a proposal to add all of that at one time, right? Because that would not make any sense at all. So we would be looking at a 4 to 5 year timeline to phase in. If you recall, for those of you who were on the board when we implemented the medical academy, we had a timeline, so we knew what courses were coming. So again, if tonight we have a pretty good consensus that it's worthwhile to pursue planning on these pathways, that's what we would be bringing as a more concrete proposal, including timeline a little bit later here in the spring. The one exception to that is that there is a course that we would like to bring forward, plan for and bring forward in our course proposal process for next year. So that means, if you recall, you'd be hearing those in October, November-ish, is when we usually bring those here to the board. And that is our business incubator. This is something that Mr. Reauthorization put a lot of work into, Mr. Beelan, Mrs. Kish at the high school, and Dr. Rowe, before he transitioned into this role. This is something we're really passionate about, and we do believe we can get this rolling very quickly and offer this opportunity for our kids for next year. Planning cycles are good, but you also don't want to be so bogged down in planning that it's another 3 years before you offer something if you can do it a little bit more quickly. So that would come with a little bit of a cost, a little bit more so than just a regular new course that we would bring to the board. It'd be a $25,000 curriculum startup, and so that's not year over year, but that's 1 year. Then there's $5,000 in out years. A facility renovation. Now, I will say that some of the districts to our east that have been very, publicized for some of being on the front edge of this business incubator, they've had, grants from Apple for $1 million and renovated a giant space. That's not what we're looking at doing, not for $1 million. But there are grants out there, and so a bare bones facility renovation would be some of our rooms in the high school, turning them into that incubator setting to really make it authentic for kids, so it's not like we're just going to a classroom and sitting there. Think about the collaboration spaces in our hub in the high school, looking at innovative use of space. The bare bones would be about $25,000. Again, we believe that we can get some grants. We have a meeting set up actually with the Domek Foundation in the next few weeks, where we are really hoping to work with them. If we can get some grants and we're able to fund it that way, we wouldn't want to do it bare bones. We would want to move forward and do a little bit higher end renovation on that, to make our facilities the best that they can be. So we wanted to be transparent about that if we bring that course proposal forward, we'll have specifics for you at that time, but letting you know that. We work with Mr. Altmaier about adding those funds to the budget for the coming fiscal year, and that's something we believe actually is just a very good use of funds. So that would come through the course proposal process. So our next steps, course proposals will come very, very soon for 1920. Between September and April, our curriculum review will proceed because we actually are going to be reviewing the curriculum in our current classes, revamping it, making sure we're aligned to standards, just like a typical curriculum review. Also planning for business incubator as long as we get consensus tonight that we want to continue moving forward with that for next year. And then in April, we would be bringing forward our curriculum review report. It'd be a little more complicated than our typical curriculum reviews, just because it would include some of the proposals for these pathways. That would be feasibility studies, student interest, very, very specific work being done before we make those concrete proposals. So with that, like I said, our goal tonight is just to take questions. If you want to hear anything more about these pathways, either just for interest or because you feel you need to know more in order to kind of give that consensus, we're here to answer questions and then hopefully move forward with our planning.
All right, thank you for that presentation. One question I had is, I understand you looked at some schools that are already doing this, specifically with the incubator, business incubator. Can you tell us a little bit about that experience?
Would you like to know about facilities, projects, what specific?
Just what you learned from wherever you looked at.
I think we toured 5 schools, and then we've spoken to the board of directors for that educational company there. right from the beginning of the program, the kids walk into the class and they're trying to find, I believe it's 20 different problems in their daily life. And then they're tasked with finding different ways to solve those problems. And ultimately where they're going is trying to develop a minimum viable product, a solution to those problems. And it's not until second semester even where they're trying to physically build a model of that. They're trying to test out, is there a market for this? Who is your market? Who would you sell this to? What is it going to cost? And it's going through all of the market analysis tools that go into this business planning. They're setting up a business structure, figuring out marketing. And they're during that process, once or twice a month, business leaders are coming in to speak to the kids about certain units. It's a curriculum that is more or less developed and given to us, and then we follow through with it, add to it, and tweak it for Huntley. We would have a corporate, what was the right name for that? District champion. And that would be a community person that would help us bring in these business leaders. Each group of 4 to 5 students has a business mentor that is geared for that particular business. Whether that was clothing or whether it was a app development or whether it was a specific product in a field, there would be a person to kind of walk them through what that business industry is like and to bring in resources to try to help them further their product. Once they get to that point, then they start making business pitches, and it's very much like Shark Tank. So then we would try to get together, we would get a panel of business leaders, educational administration and whatnot to present these ideas to. And then ultimately we would love to get together funds to be able to try to give grants to these students to get these businesses up and running. Some of them are actually manufacturing products, some of them are selling a service. Barrington is where this originated from, and so it's been through several iterations. They have what they call legacy companies. So these businesses have been running for multiple years, and those students have graduated, and they hire back students that are currently at the school to continue on with these businesses. So some of them are just finding manual labor for people. So there's an organization that goes out, hires students, vets them for whatever the job is for, background checks and whatnot, and then hires them to do different events for companies. But it's continually finding that labor source, finding those events, finding different venues to market your business through. So it's highly successful. Those kids accredited all sorts of different things to these courses, being able to do public speaking, to be able to be the group leader. They hire and fire within their own groups. It's really interesting. It's far more than where our curriculum currently takes us.
Great, thank you. President, you have a question.
I do. I think this is a great program. I'm excited that we're looking at this. I worked a little bit with another high school during this process, so I think it's great. My question is, have we talked to the business community, our partners, about this yet, or no?
Not.
I can take that because Mr. Weedoff has been raring to go on that, and we've been holding off till we had this conversation because we didn't want to be publicizing in the community until we had a chance to just talk it through here internally with the board. And so I wanted to take that question for you because he's been after me. Can we go yet? Can we go yet? Can we go yet? So just wait. Hang on till the community.
I assume you're going to partner with the chamber to do that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. Yep. Perfect.
I would encourage you to do that, I guess is what I would say. My other question is, how are you going to choose the students that participate in the incubator process? Is it open to all students? Is there parameters? How does that work?
Currently, our thought process is we would set up some prerequisites of coursework that we would like to take that. We would very much like to treat that as a capstone course. But again, this is just initial planning. We still need to go through the approval process and figure out a few more things before we formally present that to you, so that could change. But we would like to offer that mainly to juniors and seniors to get them to a higher level to be able to communicate. These mentors cannot always come to school. Sometimes groups may have to go out. We just make transportation a little bit easier if they were a little bit older.
Okay.
So just the maturity, we've kind of pegged it as a junior, senior level class.
Okay. Thank you.
So I have a comment.
So this kind of reminds me of, I went to high school in the city of Chicago, but I went to a vocational high school. So this kind of reminds me of like vocational learning, where we took shops. Your freshman and sophomore year, you try everything. By junior year, you select a shop that you want to work in. You do your core studies, and then you leave 4 hours of the day, or the instructor came to us, and you got paid if you went to work every day. So that was one thing, and you got high school credits for your classes because you had to work like from 12 to 4, because then it still allowed you to go home and study from like 4 to 6 or 8 or whatever. Or if you play sports like I did, go back to high school and play your sport and then go home. So I heard us talking about the dual credit part of it. Is that something that we would explore with the kids being able to actually do an internship and possibly start working there? So by the time they graduate, they could have their dual credit and some real work experience.
There's lots of opportunities like that. It depends on which one of those pathways.
Yeah, well, we already have co-op,
Correct.
right, which is a different element.
A different beast altogether.
exactly.
These would be industry-specific internships, apprenticeships that we would like to be able to try to build into, depending on which pathways we decide to go to.
You know, I would add that an option that we could incorporate our membership as one of the 10 schools in the pilot competency-based education pilot through ISB is we could certainly build out competencies that our students in the work program or in a program like you're describing, where they could come back and as a part of a shell course through real-life work experiences and showing mastery of understanding business and functioning as contributing members to the business society, we could give them high school credit for that. We just have to build that internally, and that's one of the avenues that some of the other pilots are taking in the competency-based pilot. Peoria being one of them. A lot of work study, high school credit for the work that they're doing in the outside, mainly for credit recovery. However, we could certainly tailor it for different reasons if that was if this builds up as we anticipate it will.
And this may well be post-high school as well, as getting these connections set up at the community so we reach certain benchmarks and then they hire our students and be able to continue on with their education. MCC's got a lot of classes where students go to school part-time and then get paid. We just would now have the tools to be able to give to our students to get them into those relationships. So some of that may well be post-high school. But.
Thank you.
You know, I would just add, thank Mr. Wiedoff for his. This has been a lot of work that he has put into this. His leadership has been tremendous. Watching him grow into his first year as a department chair last year, and the work that he did in getting our business department trending in the right direction in terms of setting a vision and developing what they would like the department to be. We have a lot of potential in our high school to have a booming business community. It's an area that we have not tapped yet, and it needs to be tapped. So I commend you for the work that you've done and the direction that this is going. So please keep it up.
Thank you, sir.
So I guess we would just ask at this point if there are any concerns that anybody has that you would want to waive us off any of these pathways. Otherwise, we would be full steam ahead with some planning and bring back some concrete proposals in the spring.
I think that sounds good.
I'm in.
Yeah. Got a lot of head nodding here, so yeah, full steam ahead.
And I concur with all that too. I saw the capstone stuff under the computer science, and a little bit of concern is in offering or trying to do a capstone with a CompTIA. There's a wide range of stuff there to choose from as far as those kinds of certifications. And where my concern would be is having too much of a focus in one direction, but it's hard to choose from those certifications because there are so many, and also making sure that the students that do go through that kind of certification have enough time to prepare for those tests as well. Right. Because they can, I don't want to say they're grueling necessarily, it's not like going through a Cisco certification, which is in and of itself a very grueling process from what I understand. But still being able to do that in the context of a semester class or a full year class. Right. So, yeah, I think this is a great idea. There's a lot of good meat on the bones here, And I like the direction that this is going. I really like it.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you for the presentation and answers to the questions, and full steam ahead, and then we'll move on to number 7, Human Resource Committee. Mr. Gentry.
Okay. First item up is 7.1, Human Resource Updates. Mr. Zier.
Yeah, good evening. Just a few quick updates from the Human Resources Department. We wrapped up, obviously, onboarding teachers to get the school year started. So that was very successful, getting everyone staffed, and still continuing to staff as we go throughout the year in some of our support staff positions as some people move on to different careers or decide to retire at this point in time. So very happy with the way the school year started in terms of staffing. As we move into September, we are getting ready for our first payroll that's coming up on 9/10, so very important payroll as teachers receive raises at that point in time, and also any type of lane change they may have seen. So that 9/10 payroll, very important in the school community, and also some other things that are getting prepared that are going to be brought to you. Just some language down here at the bottom. What you'll see at the September board meeting is the administrator and teacher salary report. I will share that with you. We have to have that posted by October 1st, and also an IMRF report for anyone over $75,000 in total comp. So I'll be sharing that with you at the September board meeting as an update for informational purposes only.
Good. All right. Any questions or concerns on HR update? If not, we'll move to the 7.2 hearing officer contract.
And so we have a hearing
Lots
officer.
of familiar face involved here, so very exciting to see.
Yes, so the hearing officer contract here is for Mr. Ari to come on as our hearing officer as needed. Hopefully not needed at all, but just in case, he would serve as the hearing officer. So a basic contract there for him to move forward at the next board meeting.
Okay. Any questions or concerns with moving the 7.2 forward?
Thrilled to move that forward.
Exactly. Okay, move on to 7.3, mentor contracts. Anything to highlight there?
Just a couple mentor contracts here, specifically for Mr. Stephen McWilliams and Mr. Stephen Mazajewski. Mr. McWilliams is going to would be serving as a mentor for our new high school principal, and Mr. Mazajewski would be serving as a mentor for our new middle school principal.
Good. Exciting topic there to see as well. Any questions or concerns on that item?
Nope.
If not, we will move on to 7.4 enrollment update.
Sure, I'm going to jump in on this one. It falls under Human Resources Committee because of the implications on staffing and those sorts of things, but each year we do a review of our enrolled students. We have all of our schools go through their rosters for classes, compare those rosters with attendance for the first 6 days of school, just to make sure we're working from a solid baseline of student enrollment for the year. It puts us in a position where we can compare that data to the same data from years past, identify trends and those sorts of things in enrollment, and help with planning going forward. So I have for you, for information tonight, those 6-day enrollment numbers for this year, as well as 6-day enrollment numbers from a year ago, and the enrollment numbers from the last day of the last school year. I included those so you can kind of see the comparisons of what happens from the start of the school year to the start of the school year, but also understanding that there's fluctuations in enrollments throughout the school year that we tend to expect. Overall, not a huge change this year. A few things that we were certainly expecting. The high school's getting bigger. We've known that for a long time. We've known it's coming. LeGee, as we heard in the budget up front of the evening, there's not a lot of growth in the community, but the growth that is happening in Tullamore, and those students in elementary go to LeGee. That causes their enrollments to go up. Painting with a broad brush across the rest of the schools, there are some decreases in enrollment at the other schools. In the end, I don't think it's a huge change in enrollments for the year, but it's certainly something to be watching year after year. That said, I would certainly entertain any questions.
Questions, comments? Wide eyes? Okay. Anything I guess any surprises from what you're seeing, or just kind of?
I wouldn't say anything surprising necessarily. We've been watching the enrollment numbers overall for the last couple of years. They've definitely, at a lot of grade levels, plateaued. We're starting to see a couple grade levels start to trickle off a little bit. So those are the things that we're going to want to keep watching.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of surprises, I don't think I would say we were caught off guard by anything.
Okay.
You know, I'll add just as from the community perspective, what Huntley is advertising in terms of community growth and the projections. Lennar is about to re-enter the picture in terms of rebuilding in Tullamore. They're going to begin with some additional Endare homes at the front end, which is our 55-plus community in Tullamore. They're going to work on some of the townhomes and finish that project out, as well as the single-family homes next to the clubhouse to finish that area out before they move west. There are blocks of developed sections of Tullamore that have yet to be built upon.
Mm-hmm.
They're projecting 500 homes to be built in there starting in 2019, I believe. That being said, with 55 plus and townhome and single family, we don't really anticipate a major impact on the school district. 100 students potentially, but I'm grabbing that number completely out of the air.
Mm-hmm.
Huntley has also reported that Cider Grove over by the Red Barn in St. Mary's is going to be adding, I want to say, 150-ish homes to finish that development out. So with the positive trends that the economy is experiencing, we are seeing some interest in finishing out some unfinished subdivisions, which is a positive. So next year's numbers could begin to balance out the declining enrollment, and we might not see as dramatic of a drop. I say dramatic for us, of a drop as we did this year. So hopefully that'll level things off. But so there are some promising things on the horizon in terms of the community and new construction.
Great, thank you. Any other questions before we move on? Okay, then we'll move on to item 7.5. Understand Mr. Zier about Plan Pay Memo of Understanding.
And this is a memo of understanding that goes along with HESPA. As we discussed, and everyone's awake now. For the most exciting item of the meeting, a memo of understanding.
HR committee is very enlightening for folks. So.
Right. So this memo of understanding, as we discussed earlier, when we were looking at our strategic plan and when we report out on our strategic plan, as you recall, we're changing that time period when we're going to report out. So connected to that strategic plan is a bonus pay for our support staff and our administrators. Historically, we've paid that out on June 25th, quickly following the June board meeting after we've determined the percentage of the goals that we've met. Since we are now reporting out the strategic plan goals a little bit later, we needed to adjust some language with the HESPA employees, which also triggers over to administrator contracts. Administrators in their contracts, it's actually connected to this HESPA language, so that would automatically update that. So what we're doing here is, in a nutshell, instead of paying out June 25th, if you are on our payroll on June 25th, we will pay out on September 10th. So that first payroll check of September, so if you were employed with us, if someone would happen to leave, they would get that bonus check sent to them for completing the school year for being on that payroll. So this allows us to get all our strategic plan goals in, especially some of the test scores that come in a little bit later, and get a more accurate percentage of the goals that we're meeting. Of course, we had to move this pay period back. HESPA was definitely in agreement with this, and this is the memo of understanding to shore up that language.
Okay. No, we've discussed this one before, so any questions or concerns? I think it makes a lot of sense. Okay, thank you. And with that, that will conclude the HR committee, and we'll move it to Building and Grounds. Mr. Troy.
Thank you. Speaking of bright spots, item 8.1, monthly O&M updates. Anything to highlight on there, Mr. Rinkosik?
Yes. There we go. To give you an update on the progress on our initiative to have solar arrays installed on our 3 campuses. The Village of Algonquin reviews are completed for the special use permit evaluation, and we move on with them to for construction documents review. That's a very positive step. Village of Huntley, we've been through conceptual design review meeting with the Village of Huntley, where we got into a public hearing and board action over there real soon, starting early next week. At Lake in the Hills, we've met with the board of their municipality. They have no concerns with the array installation, with the information as presented, and we move on to them for construction review when construction plans are developed. The last key step that is in process is the ComEd interconnect study to get their endorsement that the installations will not affect their switching stations in the area. That is, we expect to hear back from them by about the end of September, according to their online study progress access that you have. Very user-friendly system. Nothing bad to report on that front. So it's moving forward. It looks like positive steps. All 3 villages' interactions to date are very positive. Second thing I wanted to bring up is summer 19 projects. That I brought the board last month. The long-term deferred maintenance plan had some projects on the radar for summer 19. We've had kickoff meetings on those matters, and consultants are off working on the designs to get those out to bid real soon. Summer 18 projects, the roofing projects, all have a remaining punch list, albeit very small. We've done extensive walkthroughs and whittled it down to a narrow few things left to do on those projects. That's a good place to be. The parking lot improvement project at Chesac and Martin, very involved project. Actually, the first few days of school, I hung out in the parking lot at the key times when they were drop off and pick up. The first day I actually was joined by the traffic engineer, Tim, who designed this, and I have since had meetings with the principals of the 3 buildings affected and our administrators, chief security officer, transportation department director, and concluded that there might be some fine-tuning of signage and things like that that we want to affect. I would expect to bring the board a small change order at the regular meeting on the 20th for some additional signage. Things like visitor parking designation and some extra just designated like right turn only, left turn only sort of things. And I just received today H.R. Green, our civil engineer's endorsement of the proposal from Abby, so was not able to bring that to you tonight. Other than that, I'd be happy to answer any questions about things going on in the O&M department.
Okay, any questions from the committee? Questions from the board?
I do just curious on your list here of your new custodial contract. How's that gone so far?
We received a batch of paperwork actually late last night of what we call for certified payroll, just so we can verify that there's payment being made as called for in their proposal. All things look to be in order in preliminary fashion. We're asking further questions to make sure that, we want to make sure that they're offering the expected insurance to their employees. We're short a few staff only. We're very close to full staff with them. They've been bringing in more new people than people have been leaving. There's been a little bit of turnover still.
Yeah, I was wondering how much.
The pressures of the economy continue.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions from the board or the committee? All right. Thank you for the report. Move on to 8.2, change order number 1 for the Malcor roofing contract.
Yes, this is basically reconciliation to close out their contract. We had an allowance in the bid for some expected replacement of insulation board, substrate,
as the project started, and we tallied it as they went. In fact, there was a lot less than anticipated. In addition, they had found that there was some of the rubber roof membrane, the old membrane, which the new coating system was supposed to be adhered to, that had some wrinkles, tenting that's called in the industry, where they had to cut it open and patch some things, very minor albeit. But this is a change order that would reconcile in that project complete. Net cost to the district is additional cost to the district $1,715.
Okay, thank you.
Not bad for a $1 million project.
Exactly. Yep. Okay. Any questions from the committee or the board? Any objection with moving that forward? All right, we'll go ahead and move that on. 8.3, change order number 3 for the WeatherGuard roofing contract.
These are usually pretty easy ones. This is a deductive change order.
Right.
This is a reconciliation of the allowance on plywood deck and nailing, additional nailing that might be required when we ripped off the old shingles and underlayment and uncovered the old decking. We had a substantial amount of plywood replacement at McCaben, but when we got to Conley, it slowed down quite a bit. We were very surprised. Not sure why that is, but again, we are ahead compared to what we estimated, and our estimate was based on past experience in replacing shingle roofs, which we have had much of in the last 3 years. But this is a deductive change order that's quite substantial. As stated there, $17,656 to reconcile and close that contract.
Okay. Any questions from the board or the committee? Objections to moving that forward? No objections? Okay, we'll go ahead and move that forward as well. 8.4, this one we'll turn over to Dr. Rowe.
All right. Mr. Armstrong, you want to re-dim the lights?
Maestro.
I know. Now stay awake, everybody. I know. All right, so to set this conversation up, about approximately a year ago, I was approached by Dr. Berkey asking me as then high school principal to conduct a review of our fine arts facilities and a potential expansion to address the needs of a growing fine arts community, the development of the Fine Arts Academy and what that might need in terms of space and support and improved facilities. For those of you who participated in or were around during the high school expansion years of 2013 through 2016, the fine arts area of the school was not really an area that was addressed because one, of need, and two, other areas required more attention due to student population growth. Dan, can you advance it? It's not communicating. There we go. All right, so I placed a color copy of this at your workstation that's much larger than what you see on the screen, and I'd like to walk through it with you just so you can kind of frame the areas that we're referencing. The large object in the middle of the screen is the Performing Arts Center. On the far right corner of your far right section of your printout and on the screen is the entryway into the Performing Arts Center, where I believe it's door 5 at the high school, and then in the bottom corner you have the field house entrance. This is fine. We can do it like this, Adam. That's no big deal. It's okay. So then that's an area of emphasis, and in the top left corner is an area of emphasis that would be a potential new construction area of a black box theater. I'll go into detail about that as I go through some of the financials. Just to the right of that, a new entryway, new lobby it says, and some additional workspace for paint shops, some storage, and some work areas in the PAC. That is dramatically, no pun intended, needed. And then our band room is in need of expansion. what we have experienced over recent years is a dramatic increase in the theater offerings that we're able to offer at the school. What we have not necessarily seen is a necessary growth in our band classes and performance, but we have seen a pretty dramatic increase in our marching band. The quality of our band has improved with new equipment, additional equipment, as well as the growth of orchestra up to the high school, which is it's in its first year of inception at the high school. Our theater department, on the other hand, has grown in the last 3 years from 72 students taking theater courses to 138 students taking theater courses, and expanding from one theater set class to 3 theater classes, and more being desired on the horizon. Our Fine Arts Academy, as it will roll out over the next several years, we anticipate continued interest and growth in the numbers that we see at our middle schools in fine arts that tend to drop off when they come into high school because of the amount of opportunity and choices that they have, to those students being able to remain connected to the arts in some way, shape, or form. So to frame the presentation after showing you kind of the visual here, I want to share with you the conceptual drawing, and Mr. McGrath from Wold is here and he'll be available to answer any questions. Thank you for being patient throughout the presentations and the long board meeting we've had thus far. But my intention and our purpose this evening is to share the conceptual drawing of what is possible, garner any feedback and discussion that you may have surrounding these ideas, and kind of get a consensus blessing to move forward with all or some of the projects. What I'd like to move into are broken down components of each of these projects that I had Mr. McGrath break down into individual projects, giving the board the opportunity to say yes to some, yes to this, no to this, yes to all, as you see fit. So to get to the money and to kind of frame the money side of this, we have approximately $1 million remaining in the capital improvements grant that funded the high school expansion. In totality, this project, if we did everything, would be a little over $3 million as proposed. Mr. Rinkosik, as well as I, have the belief that we can do this project cheaper than it is presented in the packet based on some of the assumptions that were being made that have since changed, as well as some ideas he has in terms of managing it. Dan, if we could advance to the next slide, please. So to first look at the band storage, which on your handout is the last page on the back. I believe the band storage is probably the most needed. Expanding the band room and adding some additional storage, giving the band room the space that they need to function. It is a very, very tight room currently. If you reference back to your handout and notice the area on the bottom left corner where it says orchestra storage, we have reorganized that space and added orchestra storage in there, which has increased functional space in the band room, but what it has done is it's displaced other band storage area into our athletic areas. The athletic department is going to need that area back in the next couple of years. Mr. Wilson is graciously, although begrudgingly, supporting storing some band equipment instead of cheerleading mats in that area. But ultimately that's going to need to come back into the band area. So by knocking out the exterior wall on the north side of the band room and expanding that approximately out to where the current sidewalk already is, gives the band room space as well as storage space for equipment and growth in the coming years. Dan, to the next slide, please. All right, the scene shop is another area of almost necessity in this project. In the scene shop, Mr. Kanapke and Mrs. Woods are currently working and preparing all of our shows and many of you have been in the back of the Performing Arts Center into the workroom. Currently, that's where construction of sets happens, painting of sets happens, as well as storage of all equipment. If you've seen a show in recent years, you've noticed a dramatic increase in terms of the quality and technology and just the showmanship that Mr. Kanapke has brought to the PAC, which has been tremendous, and we're very proud of that. However, when you look at the working conditions in which he is able to do the magic that he's able to do, he needs more space and he needs a safer workspace, and that he shouldn't be painting in the same area where he's building without proper fume and ventilation. And this would add that space for him as well as additional storage. I'll point out an example of how this will be cheaper than it is currently presented. If you look at the Scene Shop edition, and you look at the structural and miscellaneous steel as well as an overhead crane. When we were discussing with Mr. McGrath what we needed, Nathan described kind of a vertical storage system. And so he pieced together an option in kind of an in-house crane mounted on a wall to raise and lower materials. Mr. Nkasik, upon review following this initial set, we have a forklift, a small forklift that can fit down the halls that we already own that could be used for some of those things. So it's little things like that this is, again, very conceptual. Conceptual and is not concrete. Dan, if you could go to the next one. The next one is the Black Box Theater. The Black Box Theater is definitely the largest lift, estimated at $1.8 million. And what this would be added on the northeast corner of the high school as is. If you look at the description or the printout that you have in front of you, there is a red line in that curve. What we're anticipating is that curve represents the current sidewalk curve that's there. What I asked Mr. McGrath to do, and kind of gave him some boundaries, we're not willing to lose any parking spots, and we're not willing to mess with the parking lot in any way, shape, or form. If you remember a couple of years ago, all the drama that we went through in our parking lot, we don't want to go there again. So that's kind of off limits. So the Black Box Theater would encroach a little bit on that area. However, preliminary assumptions are that we can do this without narrowing the roadway or losing any parking spaces. Black Box Theater is the name. However, I think it's important to understand that when meeting with the Fine Arts 3000 committee, which consisted of art teachers, our fine arts, our music choir, Mrs. Woods, Mr. Kanapke, Mrs. Melindy, and Mr. Troy, as well as some of the administrators at the high school, it was widely believed that although Black Box Theater is the title given to this space, it's more of a fine arts multi-purpose room. Because what could be conducted in this, to give you an idea, and I didn't add a picture of what a Black Box Theater currently looks like. However, Mr. Armstrong could probably pop out of this and give us a visual of what a Black Box Theater is, so you can frame your thinking, which was important in our. Just Google search Black Box Theater and do images. I meant to add it and I didn't get around to doing that. So we could have
be nothing but a black screen.
Our speech classes. We could have our dance courses. We could have our theater classes in here. If this were constructed today, that one on the far right is perfect, Dan. If we could have this in this current school year, we would have 3 theater classes scheduled in this room as we speak. And in the coming years, with the addition of the Fine Arts Academy, we would likely be able to fill this. I tried that too. The same thing happened to me when I clicked on it. 6 to 7 periods a day. What currently happens, and is a struggle that we have, and we'll save you from, Lord, we don't want to send you back into scheduling the PAC mode and how difficult that is. But we have theater classes that are scheduled in the Performing Arts Center that a few years ago worked for us. In recent years, with the advancements that Lori and Nathan have made and the amount of work that goes into prepping for each show in knowing that each of our shows has 3 to 4 weeks to prep before they go on. Nathan has quite a bit of technical work in terms of timing lights, timing music, building sets, and he has to be on the stage constructing these scenes, which makes it difficult to conduct a class in there. So we've scheduled them first, second, and third period, which takes us through 9:30, meaning if Nathan couldn't get to his work until 10 a.m., it really cramps the time and would potentially impact the quality. With a space such as this, both could coexist and happen simultaneously. The Black Box Theater is a very versatile space. We could have, as I said, our speech courses and speech tournaments, our dance classes and orchestras could perform and practice in this space. We would use this space probably after school from 2:30 to 7 or 8 p.m. nightly, if this is something that you're interested in. It is a big bill. However, I think it is a growing fine arts community in our community as well as our high school would be a tremendous add for our students. I would be remiss if I didn't add that Nathan and Lori would most likely not be able to manage this space in addition to the current Performing Arts Center, and the addition of a Black Box Theater would most likely. I'm already out of time, Lori? It's okay, just kidding. I'm just kidding. My 3 minutes are up. However, it would likely result in the need for an additional assistant tech director. So there would be an additional position to manage this, to add to Lori and Nathan's team, would likely be required. But then again, there's also added benefit of training a bench should one of our valued employees move on, or just in terms of quality that we're able to if we were to have 2 shows going on in the same evening or in the same week, that it's not draining our employees.
Now, where would those, like the 2:30 to 7 example, where would they go today?
They are fighting for space in the Performing Arts Center. They are practicing in classrooms that are not necessarily the space that they would perform. So our theater classes, our theater troupe is practicing in a classroom to prepare to perform on a stage. Okay. Until they can get in and get time on stage, but they may not need as big of a space as what the Performing Arts Center provides.
Right. Okay.
So it's doable in its current reality. Mm-hmm. It's just not an ideal and not an optimal scenario. Okay. All right. And finally, Dan, if we could hop back to the presentation, is the Playbill Gallery. And the Playbill Gallery is the area to the far right of the sheet that you have in front of you, where we wanted to create the committee felt it was important to create an environment when you were entering the theater, that you were entering the theater with artwork on the walls, all of the playbills for the last couple of years that our high school had been performing, as well as we called my new architectural terms that I gained during the 2013 to 2016 years at the high school, of clouds, of dropping portions of give the feel that the ceiling is not a 2+ story industrial kind of a feel, but more floating ceiling, kind of like what we have in the hub, kind of closing that space off, making it a little bit more cozy. This is also an area where I don't anticipate that the cost currently presented would be the outcome, because after meeting with the committee, Lori provided some tremendous feedback that our current reality is that our students are in this area every single day for their blended courses at tables and chairs, and that's not something we want to take away because it's so heavily utilized, but it's also if we made this and filled this area with soft seating, it doesn't benefit our students in how they need to work in terms of having kind of a table environment, and it'll be more difficult to clean. And Mr. Rinkosik will share that he is adamant at having hard surfaces in terms of cleanliness, and so that'd be an area we probably can cut back on. We would most likely want to replace this with extending the carpet instead of tile to soften the space. And then when I presented this idea to Leslie and Paul, we've been in need of a ticket ticket counter or a box office for some time, and the idea of adding a box office in the bottom right corner and actually building in a little room in the bottom right corner next to the vestibule where the old ticket counter used to be, that could be enclosed and closed off and a window built in, made a lot of sense as a great area to add to that space.
Now, where is that?
In the bottom right corner, if you see next to the vestibule and lobby, there's a counter there. That counter currently doesn't exist. We removed that a couple of years ago. It was breaking down. And if we enclose that into a small room, we could have a full-blown box office that could be beneficial for the program. I'll add that they're in the concessions area. There are some needs. The fine arts boosters and athletic boosters are currently sharing the concessions, and the opportunity could be there that when Willow Creek moves out and we gain some storage back in the coat check area, we could help improve their ability to share their space and store their product that they both are able to sell at the concessions during the different events. So again, to kind of recapture my intention for bringing this to you is to, one, update you on the work and gain some consensus of, are you interested in pursuing this entire project? Obviously, we only have $1 million left in the capital improvement fund. We would need to kind of get a blessing to move forward with planning. So I would be seeking to engage Wold in some deeper architectural work, as well as guiding and leading the committee of teachers, administrators, and our 2 board members, and then add on our fine arts boosters and some community members to the project to work out the nitty-gritty details, and then come back with a detailed conceptual visual for you of what they're projecting it to look like, as well as an up-to-date financial budget for you to kind of put a stamp of approval on. So I'm looking for consensus to move forward with Wold in the planning process at this point, and or any discussion about, are you interested in all of these projects? Are there any projects that that you're not interested in? Thank you.
What I'd like to say before we get into some detailed discussion is just understanding where we're at with this. It's coming to us to see what we're conceptually wanting to bring forward so that it can then go back to the groups that have been working on it, and including a larger group, to get the details based on our guidance, and then it'll come back to us for some more details. So this isn't this is what we want to do, go for it thing at all, and it's very important to know where we are at in the process. So
to engage with Wold beyond this will come at a cost. So before we engage in work together, we just want to be sure that we're on the right track with what you'd like to see done.
Just maybe nitpicky questions, but when it says art room and auditorium scope of work, I'm not sure, is that part of?
Well,
I'm trying to.
Sure. It's a good question. So as a part of this, we investigated all aspects of the arts. And so our art teachers had some suggestions of additional sinks in their classroom, additional spray paint booths to ensure that they're working in a safe environment when they're doing some of their projects, and a soldering tent.
Sure.
So as well as they wanted to move the Mac lab over to the art hallway so that they were directly in line with all of the other classrooms. Administratively reviewing this, I didn't believe that moving the Mac lab and the cost that it would take to relocate them 200 feet to be in line with the other art rooms was a good use of district funds. And we believe that we can handle soldering tent, and if they would like to add sinks or spray paint booths, we can handle that in summer projects, and didn't want to include this in the scope of this work because we can handle that on our own by adding to our O&M project list. And they weren't to the level of cost that would be worthy of adding to this project when we can just handle it in the summer.
So still the list there's the 3 groupings in the detailed costs that are.
We're just removing their wishes from this potential project and handling them internally.
I gotcha. Okay.
I have some thoughts. Thank you, Dr. O, for this overall. I think overall this is a good project, one that we need. I think we just need to prioritize some of the costs that we have. Definitely, we need the band storage. I mean, we've known for years that we are short on storage for our band, so definitely that. And in the scene shop too, I think I've been back there, and if you've been back there, you know that this is probably not the safest environment currently, and we need to be able to keep everyone safe back there. I'm a little, box office is a great idea. I'm a little concerned about a couple things. The playbill gallery, I think it's a great idea to put our past playbills and things there. I love that idea. I'm just not sure we need the extra expense of making it seem lower to the ground with the clouds and the seating. I just feel like we're not in the theater business. I mean, it's nice, but I'm just not sure that that's a necessity. I'm a little concerned about the black box theater, just in the cost of it. I mean, I don't know if is the size like a typical size of a black box theater?
I did a little bit of checking myself. I did a search online. So Highland Park High School has one and Taft High School has one in Chicago. I wasn't able to find out what the dimensions were, but there is a high school in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, that does have one. It's called Kennedy High School. The dimensions of theirs is 64 feet by 64 and 30 feet high. So it is larger than what we're looking at here. And what we saw in the pictures is that there's rows of seating that is movable. And if you've been to the Cosman Center at the Park District, you know that they have those seats that come out and then they just fold up. So that's kind of what we're looking at here.
Okay.
But as you saw in the pictures, it's like 3 rows deep instead of
Right.
8 or 9 or 10
I
or
guess
whatever.
that's one of the questions. Maybe, can we do something to maybe minimize this $3 million cost? I know you said that there were some things we could do on here. Just concerned with the overall cost because we just talked about the CTE program. There's going to be additional costs for that and maybe some renovations for those programs. And then in addition to this, I'm a little concerned about this. I'd be in favor of this if we can kind of prioritize and pare down a little bit.
I don't know if Mr. McGrath, if you have anything to add in terms of the size of the black box theater to put things into perspective for the board. I would welcome your feedback. Please.
Come over to the microphone and make sure the green light is on.
We have to think about the 3 viewers that are watching from home.
I think there's 4 now.
The standard black box you'll see is 60 by 60.
Okay.
And we're constrained here on the site issues, which is
Right.
why we're 53 feet on that one. But this is a perfectly functional size. The seating in a black box is usually 75 to 100 people. It's meant to be a very intimate theater and to support really different stage like theater in the round or a thrust stage, which is why you get sort of not a really dense seating, but again, it's meant to be a very intimate sort of stage. So that's a pretty comfortable black box size.
Okay.
And what about the height? Would it be?
Well, we would pick up on the height of the building at that level, so we'd want to, make everything as standard as possible, so that height, just for rigging and doing different types of performances. So,
because you'd use the scaffolding, or I saw it in the picture. I don't have a better word for it, but essentially that's what you use in order to move the lights around.
Yes.
And so that they're shining at
yeah,
a
there's a whole
particular
grid
location.
work that's up at that.
That's a better word.
Yeah.
Grid. One of my other concerns here in regards to the band room is those kids, when they go out and either perform at the football field or any of their rehearsals, they're using a set of double doors that walk straight into that band room. And by putting this black box, we're going to shut that down. They're going to have to walk through that vestibule of double doors in order to just get into those set of doors. So that's an area of concern for me. I'm not sure how to resolve that because of the physical location of this black box.
Well, the one way you could look at that is you could literally flip the band room and the black box. So the black box would be where the band room is now, and the band room would be where the new black box would be.
Yeah.
We need to look at, the site constraints on that to try to maximize or optimize
the band room size. But that clearly would be my first reaction to that concern, to say, let's flip it and look at it and see what that looks like.
Right, and that's what I was thinking along similar lines.
Yeah.
Another question that I had is, in regards to height, is there anything to preclude us from digging downward in order to achieve a 30-foot height, to do a step-down theater?
Well, the challenge with that is just ADA, and it'd
Okay.
have to be ramped for wheelchair access. And just even a 60 by 60 footprint is pretty tight once you start to get into a ramp that's 1 to 12. So for every foot you want to go down, you got to go 12 feet in length in a ramp.
Okay.
So that would probably be the impractical side of going down.
Okay, fair enough, thank you.
Just to clarify your concern, just trying to understand the downside of if they were walking through one door versus the other. What's the gist of that?
Well, this will be the new doors that are
Yeah,
added.
yeah.
So right now, they have direct access into this area, because this is not
Right.
here, this is just a grassy knoll here.
Right.
So when they come back from a competition, and you've got 120 kids trying to file in with their instruments at 11 o'clock at night, they're able to use these doors to get in this way, and they're also able to have direct access from the outside. In fact, right now, what they do is they pull up the trailer, back it into these double doors, and so when they download those instruments off that trailer, it just slips directly in. And so that kind of functionality disappears with that.
Okay.
And so that's why he was suggesting about flipping the two rooms and making this a little bit more black, making this area the black box, making this the new band room, and maybe even flipping this so that the storage spaces are also part of that
Right.
reconfigured band room, relocated.
But is there a door up? I'm pointing to this section.
No.
Is there a door up here?
No, right now, it's just this wall right here. This
I mean,
area
but
would be brand new.
In the future, though, there could be a door there and do the same
I'm
thing.
guessing that's a window because the door would show that it's swinging out.
Okay.
You'd see an arc
Yeah,
like you
yep,
do on these
yep.
other ones. So I'm guessing that that's a window.
And just to
on
show
the
you what
on the northern wall.
I'm just pointing at a potential for a door right
Out
on
of the
top,
band
right by the
storage
storage.
area?
Yeah, where it says band storage, there it looks like there's a window pane right there from the
Actually, no,
schematic.
that would be another second means of egress out of that
Oh,
room,
okay.
just based on the capacity of people that could be in that room.
Okay.
So that's the second means of egress, and again, constrained by the curb line.
Okay.
And you'll have that same requirement for the black box, just based on occupants. The second means of egress.
Because the counter to that flip is you'd also have the theater, as laid out here, you have the theater on the outside of the building, which would allow direct patrons to come in and view the shows, whatever would go on.
Yeah,
there.
this vestibule would be sort of an event entry for the black box,
yeah,
sure.
Yeah. Far better words than I came up with.
All right. No, please, you go first.
All right, probably the least qualified to talk about fine arts, but here's what I'll tell you from what I get from all this. We've got a fine arts academy that we've pursued. When I look at stuff like this, I look at how many kids are going to benefit from it, the sheer volume, what the usage of a facility like that will be. I mean, you're demonstrating what that is. And so what I would tell you is when we went through this process with renovating the high school, you got one shot at this to do it right. And you can't, for lack of a better term, you can't half-ass it. You got to do it. If you're going to do it, you got to do it right. It does cost money. We only have $1 million left from the CDB situation. So what you would be talking about is utilizing part of our fund balance to do it. So just so everybody's on the same page. I personally am not adverse to doing it because of what I think the cost benefit that I perceive from it is. Again, I know we're not making a final drop-dead decision about going forward right now, but what I would tell you at this stage of the game is I would look at, showing and continuing on the all-in best, utilization of our school space to make this, a top-notch facility for that, for that academy and for all the kids who participate in that. So I would be in favor of absolutely you continue moving down this path and making sure that you're looking at everything and everything that's possible, and then certain things can be weaned out as it's deemed, not worthy of spending that kind of money on it, but kind of stay on the path of, look at the bigger picture that we can, we'll find a way to try and do it here.
Yeah, and I had mentioned before that I thought, in talking to Dr. Rowe and Mrs. Melendi, that I figured that this would probably come out of fund balance as well. And I really didn't see another way of doing it. So I don't see it as a detriment in doing that. I don't see it as being a prohibitive amount that would preclude us from doing it.
Correct. Given our existing financial condition.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm glad you said what you said first, because I do want to dovetail onto that. I want to look at this from sort of a board policy perspective, a 30,000-foot view. I think that what we need to think about is equipping this committee and also inviting the other stakeholders who are involved, like the fine arts boosters and others that are going to be talking about the details of this, with what reflects what we as a board would want to do with this particular, not just the infrastructure, but the programs that go in here. We've expanded the high school. There was a lot of emphasis, of course, on the sports facilities when we expanded the stadium. We did expand. We got a field house. We added some great infrastructure in the building, including science wings and other student facilities. The academies that we have set up in science and engineering, the medical academy, and now the fine arts academy all reflect the way we want the school to work. I think we need to equip this group with as much as we can to maximize what this academy is going to do. I like when we were talking about the black box theater, I don't want to get bogged down on the cost of a particular element of this, because as Dr. Rose stated, this thing's going to get used a lot. It's going to be available for all sorts of programs. A lot of students are going to come through here. A lot of students' lives are going to be enhanced by using this facility. And we're not making any micro decisions about any of this right now. We're making decisions about kind of giving them a scope of, okay, if you're going to go forward, this is sort of the pie that you can look at, and how you divide that up is very important. So I think at this stage of the game, because of our financial condition, the money that's available left over from the grant and the fund balances that we have, I would prefer to not handcuff anybody here and say, here it is, go ahead and take a look at all of this. And as the stakeholders come back with more specifics, then we can talk about whether that makes sense and whether that works and fits our policy of what we want to do. So I don't want to pare down any of it at this stage of the game. Okay.
No, I think that's probably a good way to think of it. I think to your point on utilization, I think one of the great things about what we did with the high school already was the facilities that could be used by far greater numbers of people than they prior were. So like, the field house, you think, well, athletics, but there's also a PE benefit. The turf, you think, well, it's football. Well, no, it's a lot of other things you couldn't do on there before. So when you hear about 3-4 hours of full utilization a day on a new space, that'll make that better. I think that continues with that theme of being able to utilize, and truly reach and touch as many people as possible. So I guess I'm concurring with your viewpoint of, conceptually, I think the idea is, hey, let's go forward, see what the thing looks like. I guess the one question I'd come back with, though, is what's on the page? Is it constrained in any way at this point or not? Is it kind of this is what we need, if we had it, everything would be good, or is there something left on the table that's not being brought up here?
Well, I don't believe that there's anything left on the table based on what's been presented up to this point. I anticipate that as we go back to our committee with the addition and bring in some of our community partners, that will likely see new ideas come and enhance the plan that is already there. And then when we come back to you, there will probably be slight variations to what we've presented, maybe in terms of quality or potentially something we just didn't think of. But we'll, of course, through
But
Leslie
you're
and
not
Paul, keep
consciously
them.
working down to a number at this point?
At this
It's
point,
more-
no.
Okay,
At this point, no.
okay.
I mean, but, I'm not sure if it was Miss Melindy or Mr. Troy's idea of the box office edition. Even though that's a minor addition, that's a huge idea that the committee, we didn't come up with, and one that I think that we'll see more of those types of things for people who are intimately connected to this area of the school already. I appreciate the conversation and the feedback given thus far. I welcome it throughout the entire process, and I'm excited that we're moving forward to enhance the fine arts opportunities for our students. A huge component of our school, one that is growing with not only numbers but also excitement, that we're able to provide them with some improvements. Thank you. All right. Thanks, Mr. McGrath.
Thank you
Be in
very
touch.
much.
Thanks
Appreciate
for
it.
your input on this.
Okay, so with all that said, I gather, correct me if I'm wrong, that there is a consensus to go ahead and continue moving forward with this and work with Wool to see what are our options going forward. Okay. And that closes out building and grounds for the evening.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Dr. Rowe, you have enough direction to go on then? Okay.
Can we make sure we add that box office to the future skit?
The box office suggestion. Thank you.
We'll call it the Melindy box office. So. Okay. Moving on. Item 9 is Board of Education. We have our meeting minutes here from Committee of the Whole, the regular meeting and special meeting minutes. If there's any additions or corrections to that, please let me know. We'll have those go forward for the regular board meeting for approval. Okay. With that, I will make a motion at 9:14 to go into closed session for the items listed in the agenda. Second from Mr. Troy. We need a roll call on this.
Mr. Gentry?
Yes.
Mr. Guerin?
Yes.
Mr. Troy?
Yes.
Mr. Quagliano?
Yes.
Mrs. Melindy? Mrs. Walker? Mr. Fleck?
Yes, we are in closed session. Thank you.
Oh, Malik,